All she does is embarrass me. My father, Dr. Lawrence Harrison, did not just say it. He barked it across the courtroom, pointing a manicured finger at my muddy work boots. The gallery gasped. I did not flinch. I just adjusted the hood of my stained Carhartt jacket and looked at the judge. Judge Reynolds took off his glasses, leaned over the bench, and stared directly at my father. "Dr. Harrison," he said, his voice dangerously low, "you seem very concerned with your daughter's appearance. But do you have any idea who actually signed your university's payroll checks this morning?" My father's attorney froze mid-objection. My father's face went from angry red to ghost white. "Wait, what did you just say?" Before I tell you how my father found out, he was trying to sue his own landlord. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who actually owned the whole farm. My name is Zara Harrison. I am 35 years old. To my family, I am a failure. To the elite social circles of Atlanta, I am a cautionary tale of wasted potential. But to the state of Georgia, I am the owner of Green Horizon Solutions, the largest minority-owned environmental contracting firm in the Southeast. My family sees the mud on my boots and assumes I am digging ditches. They do not realize I am digging gold mines. It all started 3 weeks ago at the event that was supposed to be the highlight of the social season, my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. Growing up in the Harrison household meant living under a microscope. My father, the esteemed dean, and my mother, the perfect hostess, treated life like a performance. We were the example. The Black Excellence Poster family, grades, appearance, connections, those were the Holy Trinity. If you weren't a doctor, a lawyer, or married to one, you were invisible. I realized early on that I didn't fit their mold. While my sister Bianca was taking ballet and charm school lessons, I was in the backyard, fascinated by how the soil worked, how drainage systems functioned, how things grew. That fascination made me a millionaire. But on this humid Saturday afternoon, as I drove my battered Ford F-150 toward Buckhead, I didn't feel like a CEO. I felt like the disappointment I knew they saw. The GPS announced I had arrived at the estate. The house was a sprawling colonial mansion sitting on 2 acres of perfectly manicured land. Iron gates, circular driveway, a fountain that probably cost more than my first apartment. The driveway was already packed with luxury sedans, Mercedes BMWs, a few Bentleys. This was the Boole crowd, the doctors, the judges, the politicians. I pulled my truck up to the gate. It was covered in red Georgia clay because I had come straight from a site inspection at the new municipal airport project. I was wearing my work uniform. Steel toe boots, baggy cargo pants stained with grass and grease, and an oversized hoodie. I hadn't had time to change. I saw my father before he saw me. He was standing near the entrance, greeting a councilman, laughing that practiced boisterous laugh of his. He looked regal in his tuxedo. Then his eyes locked onto my truck. His smile vanished instantly. It was like a light switch had been flipped. He said something briefly to the councilman and marched toward my vehicle. He didn't walk. He stomped. I rolled down the window. "Dad," I started. "Happy anniver." He cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Zara, what in God's name are you doing?" "I'm here for the party," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Look at you," he hissed, his eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. "You look like you just crawled out of a sewer. And this truck, you cannot park this monstrosity here. The valet won't even touch it." I gripped the steering wheel. "Dad, I came straight from work. The contract I just landed." "I do not want to hear about your little gardening gigs," he snapped. "I have the mayor coming in 20 minutes. I cannot have a garbage truck sitting in my driveway. Move it, park it down the street, 2 blocks down behind the hedge." And Zara. I looked at him, feeling that familiar sting in my chest, the one that had been there since I was 7 years old. "Do not come through the front door," he said, smoothing his silk tie. "Use the service entrance through the kitchen. The caterers are setting up. You can blend in there until you find a bathroom to wash that filth off your face. And for the love of God, stay in the back. Do not mingle with the guests." He turned his back on me and walked away, transforming instantly back into the charming host as he greeted another guest. I sat there for a moment, the engine idling. I could have turned around. I could have driven back to my penthouse downtown, taken a long bath, and forgotten about them. But I didn't. I did what I always did. I parked the truck 2 blocks away. I walked back in the humidity, and I entered through the kitchen door just like the help. The kitchen was a war zone of waiters and chefs plating appetizers. The smell of roasted lamb and expensive perfume hung in the air. I tried to make myself small, dodging a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes. Oh, look! The prodigal daughter returns. I froze. Leaning against the marble island was Bianca, my older sister, the golden child. She was wearing a shimmering gold gown that clung to her perfect figure. Her hair was laid to perfection. She looked like a queen. "Hey, Bee," I said. "You look nice." She looked me up and down, curling her lip in disgust. "Zara, seriously, you couldn't have stopped at a gas station to change. You smell like compost." "It's soil, Bianca," I said, grabbing a bottle of water. "And it's honest work." "Honest work," she scoffed. "It's embarrassing. You know Mom told everyone you were doing charity work in Haiti. That's the only way she could explain why you look like this." I took a sip of water, hiding my smile. Charity work. If only they knew. Just then, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. There she is, our little worker bee. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Kyle, my brother-in-law, the man my father thought hung the moon. Kyle was white, came from a family of investment bankers, and had never worked a day of manual labor in his life. He was currently on his third failed startup, something about crypto for pets. But to my family, he was a visionary. I turned around. Kyle was holding a tumbler of scotch, his face flushed. He was wearing a velvet blazer that cost more than he made in a month. "Hi, Kyle," I said. He grinned, a condescending expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Good to see you, Zara. Although I gotta say, you are really committing to the whole blue-collar aesthetic. Very brave." I ignored the jab. "How is business, Kyle?" "Oh, booming. Just booming," he lied smoothly. "We are about to close a massive Series A round. Going to be huge. But hey, enough about high finance. It would probably bore you." He set his drink down and reached into his pocket. The kitchen went quiet. Even the caterers seemed to sense the tension. Bianca watched with a smirk. Kyle pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "Listen, Z," he said, stepping into my personal space. "Since you are already dressed for the dirt Dad was stressing out earlier. The irrigation valve out by the azaleas near the pool house. It is leaking a bit, creating a mud puddle. Since you are the expert on mud, be a sweetie and go tighten it up for us." He jammed the $20 bill into the front pocket of my hoodie. "Consider this a little tip," he whispered. "Get yourself something nice, like some soap." Bianca giggled. It was a cruel, high-pitched sound. I stood there feeling the texture of the cheap bill against my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs. Not from shame, but from rage. Pure, cold rage. I looked at Kyle. I saw the insecurity behind his eyes. I knew his secret. I knew he was drowning in debt. I knew my father had taken a second mortgage on this house just to fund Kyle's last failed venture. I looked past him to the doorway. My mother was standing there. She had seen the whole thing. She didn't step in. She didn't defend me. She just adjusted her pearl necklace and looked away, pretending to inspect a flower arrangement. That was the moment. That was the exact second the last thread of loyalty I held for this family snapped. They saw a laborer. They saw a charity case. They saw someone to be tipped and dismissed. They had no idea that the $20 Kyle just shoved in my pocket was less than what my company earned in interest every time I blinked. I reached into my pocket and touched the bill. I could have thrown it in his face. I could have pulled out my phone and showed them my bank balance. I could have bought this entire house right then and there and evicted them all. But I didn't. Not yet. The revenge needed to be sweeter. It needed to be total. Sure, Kyle, I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing. I will take a look at the valve. Good girl, he said, patting my cheek. I walked out the back door into the heat of the Georgia afternoon. I walked past the pool where the guests were mingling. I walked to the azaleas, and I fixed the valve. It took me 30 seconds. As I wiped my hands on my pants, I looked back at the house. It was glowing with warm light filled with music and laughter. A fortress of pretension built on a foundation of debt. I pulled out my phone. I had a text message from my chief financial officer. It read, "The acquisition of the university debt portfolio is complete. We own the paper on the administration building and the dean's residence." I smiled. I looked at the $20 bill in my hand. "Enjoy the party, Dad," I whispered to the empty air, because I just bought the venue. The last guest, a councilman with a penchant for expensive scotch, finally drove his Mercedes through the iron gates just after midnight. As the taillights faded into the humid Georgia darkness, the energy in the house shifted instantly. The veneer of the perfect happy Harrison family evaporated like mist. My mother, who had been smiling for 5 hours straight, slumped onto the white silk sofa in the formal living room, kicking off her heels. My father loosened his bow tie, his face gray with exhaustion, and poured himself a drink that was far too large for a man with high blood pressure. I stood in the corner of the room, leaning against the mahogany bookshelf, still wearing my dirty work clothes. I had stayed to help the cleaning crew mostly because I wanted to make sure they were tipped properly, since I knew my father rarely carried cash. I should have left. I should have walked out the back door and driven back to my penthouse where the air conditioning was set to 68 degrees and the silence was peaceful. But something kept me there. A morbid curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe it was just the habit of a lifetime waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. Bianca, who had spent the entire party posing for photos and laughing delicately at bad jokes, suddenly let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She threw her iPhone onto the Persian rug. It bounced harmlessly, but the drama was effective. "I cannot believe this is happening to me," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "This is a disaster, a complete and total disaster." Kyle, ever the dutiful enabler, rushed to her side, rubbing her back. "Babe, calm down. We will fix it. We always fix it. Please fix." "We cannot fix this, Kyle," she screamed, lifting her head. Her mascara was running, ruining the perfect face she presented to her 50,000 followers. "The travel agent just emailed me. The American Express Black Card was declined." "Declined, Kyle. Do you know how humiliating that is? The booking for the villa in Bali is gone. They gave it to someone else." I watched from the shadows. The Bali trip. Of course. Bianca had been posting about her upcoming spiritual retreat for weeks. She called it a journey of self-discovery, but everyone knew it was just an excuse to take photos in expensive bikinis and pretend to eat fruit bowls. My father took a long swallow of his drink and turned to Kyle. "I thought you said the liquidity issue was resolved. You told me the bridge loan came through yesterday." Kyle looked at the floor, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "There was a slight delay with the underwriters, Lawrence. Just a paperwork thing. You know how banks are. They are tightening lending across the board. It is not just us." My father pinched the bridge of his nose, squeezing his eyes shut. "A delay. You said a delay last week. And the week before that. Bianca needs to go on this trip. It is sponsored content. If she does not go, she breaches her contract with that swimwear brand." I almost laughed out loud. The swimwear brand was a drop-shipping company that paid her $500 a post. They were acting like she was losing a Nike endorsement. Mom finally spoke up, her voice tired but sharp. "Lawrence, do something. We cannot have Bianca sitting at home when she told the world she was going to Indonesia. People will talk. They will think we are struggling." "We are struggling," I thought to myself. But I stayed silent. My father opened his eyes. He looked around the room desperate. His gaze drifted over the expensive art on the walls, the crystal chandelier, the heavy velvet drapes. Everything in this room was mortgaged. Everything was leverage. And then his eyes landed on me. I saw the calculation happen in real time. I saw him assess my dirty boots, my faded hoodie, my lack of jewelry. In his mind, I was the squirrel who hoarded nuts because I was too simple to enjoy them. I was the resource he hadn't tapped yet. "Zara," he said. His voice was not kind, but it was not yelling yet. It was that smooth, reasonable tone he used when he was trying to manipulate faculty members. I straightened up, crossing my arms. "Yes, Dad." "Come sit down," he said, gesturing to the ottoman in front of him. I didn't move. "I am fine standing." He sighed, annoyed that I wasn't following the script. "Fine. Stand. Listen, we have a small cash flow situation. Just a timing mismatch, really. Assets are tied up in investments, very complex stuff you wouldn't understand the nuances of it. I understood it perfectly. It meant they were broke. Your sister needs $50,000 to secure the villa and the first-class flights for next week," he continued, as if asking for 50 grand was the same as asking for a cup of sugar. "I need you to transfer that amount to her account tonight. We will pay you back when Kyle's funding clears next month." The room went silent. Bianca stopped crying and looked at me, her eyes wide and expectant. Kyle looked relieved, like a man who had just dodged a bullet. Mom nodded as if this was the most logical solution in the world. I looked at them. Really looked at them. 3 adults playing dress-up in a house they couldn't afford, asking the family failure to bail them out. "I don't have $50,000 to give her," I said calmly. My father's expression hardened. "Do not lie to me, Zara. I know you have it. You have been working that landscaping job for 10 years. You live in that cheap apartment downtown. You drive a truck that is falling apart. You don't buy clothes. You don't go on vacations. You don't have a husband or children. Where else would your money go? You must have saved every penny you have ever earned." The insult was wrapped in logic. He thought my frugality was a necessity, not a choice. He thought I lived in a cheap apartment because I couldn't afford better, not knowing I owned the entire building and chose the penthouse because I liked the view. "I have expenses, Dad," I said. "Equipment, insurance, taxes." "Nonsense," he snapped. "You cut grass, Zara. You push a mower. Do not try to pretend you are running a corporation. Look, I know you are stingy. You get that from your grandfather. But this is an emergency. Your sister's reputation is at stake." "Her reputation," I repeated, keeping my voice level. "You want me to drain my life savings so Bianca can take pictures on a beach?" "It is her career, Zara," my mother interjected, sitting up straighter. "You wouldn't understand because you don't have a public image to maintain. Bianca is a brand. She has followers who look up to her. She inspires people. She inspires people to buy things they cannot afford," I said. Bianca gasped. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous because nobody cares what you do. You play in the dirt all day while I am building a platform. Just give me the money, Zara. You are not going to spend it anyway. You will just let it sit in a bank account until you die alone." That hit a nerve. But I didn't let it show. "No," I said. My father stood up. He was a tall man, and he used his height to intimidate. He walked over to me, invading my personal space. The smell of scotch was heavy on his breath. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I don't think I heard you correctly." I said no. I repeated, looking him in the eye. "I am not giving you $50,000. That money is my sweat equity. I worked for it. I woke up at 4 in the morning for it. I stood in the sun and the rain for it. I am not handing it over so Bianca can play pretend rich for a week." "Play pretend," he shouted, losing his composure. "How dare you? We are the Harrisons. We do not play pretend. We are pillars of this community, and you are the only crack in the foundation." He was shouting now, his face turning purple. "I gave you everything, Zara. I sent you to private schools. I paid for piano lessons you hated. I tried to mold you into someone worthy of this name. And what did you do? You threw it all away to be a glorified gardener. You embarrass me every single day. When people ask what my youngest daughter does, I have to change the subject. Do you know how that feels? It feels like the truth, I said. He grabbed my arm. His grip was painful, his fingers digging into the fabric of my work jacket. You ungrateful little wretch. You think you are better than us because you hoard a few dollars. You are nothing without this family. Nothing. Now you will go to the bank tomorrow morning and you will wire that money. Or so help me God, I will cut you off completely. I pulled my arm away from him with a sharp jerk. Cut me off? I asked, stepping back. From what, Dad? You don't pay my bills. You don't call me unless you want something. You made me park 2 blocks away from your party today. What exactly are you cutting me off from? From our protection, Kyle sneered from the couch. From the network. You think you can survive in this town without your father's name opening doors for you? I looked at Kyle, this man who had failed upward his entire life. I almost told him then. I almost told him that my father's name didn't open doors for me, it closed them. I almost told him that I had to build my company under a holding entity just so people wouldn't associate me with Lawrence Harrison's bad credit and arrogant reputation. I am not giving you the money, I said one last time. Figure it out yourselves. Sell the Benz. Sell the art. Or maybe, just maybe, tell Bianca to get a job. That was the breaking point. My father reached for the heavy crystal tumbler on the side table. He didn't think. He just reacted. He hurled the glass at me. It missed my head by inches, smashing against the bookshelf behind me. Shards of crystal rained down onto the hardwood floor. Amber liquid splashed onto my face and my hoodie. Get out, he roared. His chest was heaving. Get out of my house. You are dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead. I wiped the scotch from my cheek. It stung my skin. I looked at the shattered glass on the floor. Bianca was smirking. She looked satisfied. She thought this was a victory. She thought exile was a punishment. She didn't realize it was a liberation. Mom didn't move. She just stared at the stain on the bookshelf, probably calculating how much it would cost to fix. I looked at my father. He was panting, his eyes wild with rage. He looked small. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as the giant who controlled my world, but as a desperate, angry old man standing in a house of cards. I will send a cleaning crew for the rug, I said quietly. I turned around and walked toward the front door. Use the back door, he screamed after me. You are trash. Use the service entrance like the trash you are. I stopped. My hand hovered over the brass handle of the front door. The forbidden door. The door for guests. The door for VIPs. I opened it. The cool night air rushed in. I walked out the front door, leaving it wide open behind me. I walked down the long circular driveway, past the fountain, past the manicured hedges I knew cost $3,000 a month to maintain because my company was the one subcontracting the crew that did it. I walked the 2 blocks to my truck in the dark. My cheek was stinging. My clothes smelled like alcohol. My heart was pounding, but not with fear, with clarity. I sat in the cab of my truck and locked the doors. I pulled out my phone. I had a notification from my lawyer, Darnell. He had sent a draft of the document I had requested earlier that week, just in case. It was a foreclosure notice acquisition form. I looked at the digital file. The bank that held the mortgage on my parents' house was a small, regional lender that was looking to offload high-risk assets. My father had missed 3 payments in a row. He was technically in default, but the bank hadn't moved yet because of his social standing. They wouldn't extend that courtesy to a corporation. I typed a reply to Darnell. Execute the purchase of the mortgage note. And Darnell start the paperwork for the land survey on the 50 acres Grandma left me. Dad is going to come for that next. I want everything locked down. I put the phone down and started the engine. The rumble of the diesel engine was the most comforting sound in the world. They wanted $50,000 for a vacation. They were about to lose a lot more than a trip to Bali. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the house. I knew the lights were still on. I knew they were probably already plotting their next move, spinning the narrative, making me the villain. Let them, I thought. Let them tell their stories. I have the receipts. And soon, I would have the deed. 2 days after the anniversary disaster, I sat in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Sovereign Building in downtown Atlanta. My view was a panoramic sweep of the city skyline, a landscape of steel and glass that I had personally helped shape. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Marcus, placed a double espresso on my desk, next to a stack of contracts for the new airport expansion. The air conditioning hummed a soft, expensive silence. Here, in this sanctuary of competence and success, the smell of scotch and the sting of rejection felt like a distant memory. But I wasn't looking at the contracts. I was looking at my laptop screen. 3 years ago, after my mother complained about a string of break-ins in their neighborhood, I had hired a security firm to install a state-of-the-art system in their home. I paid the monthly monitoring fees. I paid for the maintenance. And because the account was in my name, I had full administrative access to the internal cameras. I rarely checked them. I respected their privacy, even if they didn't respect my humanity. But after the way my father had looked at me, after the way he had banished me, I needed to know what they were planning. I knew my father. He was a man who believed the world owed him a living, and when the world refused to pay up, he took what he wanted. On the screen, my father was pacing the floor of his mahogany-paneled study. He looked older than he had at the party. His skin was gray, his eyes hollow. Kyle was sitting in the leather wingback chair, his head in his hands. He looked like a man waiting for a guilty verdict. "Tell me again," my father said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "Tell me exactly what happened to the account." It was the market, Lawrence Kyle mumbled into his palms. "The crypto exchange. It collapsed overnight. I thought it was stable. All the forums said it was the next Bitcoin. I was trying to double your retirement so you could retire in style." My father stopped pacing. He walked over to the desk and slammed his hand down so hard the brass lamp rattled. "You put my entire 401k into a meme coin. You put the equity from the house into digital nothingness." I watched as my father collapsed into his chair. I could see the realization washing over him. The party, the lifestyle, the reputation he had spent 40 years building, it was all gone. He was destitute. And worse, he was destitute because he had trusted a man who wore expensive suits over a daughter who wore work boots. "What do we do?" Kyle asked, his voice cracking. "The mortgage is 3 months behind. If we don't come up with $80,000 by Friday, the bank starts foreclosure proceedings." My father rubbed his temples. He looked trapped. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then his eyes snapped open. He looked at the wall where a framed map of the county hung. "My mother," he whispered. "What?" Kyle asked. "My mother, Hattie," my father said, standing up and walking toward the map. "She left land. When she died 10 years ago, she didn't leave me money. She said I was too frivolous. She left me the house, but she left the land too." He stopped. He turned around and a look of pure venom crossed his face. "She left it to Zara." I leaned closer to my laptop screen. Grandma Hattie. The only person in that family who had ever seen me. She had left me 50 acres of undeveloped marshland in South Fulton. At the time, my father had laughed. He called it a mosquito-infested swamp. He mocked me for paying the property taxes on it every year. He said it was a burden, a white elephant. That land, my father said, tracing a finger over the map. "It's in South Fulton. I read an article in the Business Chronicle last week. The city is looking for land for a new logistics hub. That swamp might actually be worth something now. Maybe a couple $100,000. Enough to clear the mortgage and get us back on our feet." Kyle sat up, hope returning to his face. "That's it. That's the solution. We sell the land." "We can't sell it, you idiot," my father snapped. "It is in Zara's name. Hattie deeded it directly to her. She is the sole proprietor." "So ask her to sell it," Kyle suggested. My father laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Did you not see her face the other night? She wouldn't give Bianca $50,000 to save her career. Do you think she is going to hand over a deed worth 6 figures just because I ask nicely?" She hates us, Kyle. She has been waiting for this moment. She wants to see us beg. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. He wasn't wrong. I wouldn't have sold it. Not because I hated them, but because I knew its true value. That land wasn't worth a couple $100,000. It was the linchpin of the entire airport expansion project. It was worth millions. And I wasn't about to let them squander my grandmother's legacy on bailouts for Kyle's incompetence. Kyle stood up and poured himself a drink from my father's decanter. He took a long sip, and I saw a shift in his demeanor. The desperate failure was replaced by the conniving predator. "She is not well," Lawrence, Kyle said slowly. My father looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, look at her," Kyle continued, gaining confidence. "She is 35 years old. She is unmarried. She has no children. She works manual labor despite having a college degree. She dresses in rags. She isolates herself from her family. She lives in a rundown area downtown. I didn't live in a rundown area. I lived in the arts district." But to Kyle, anything without a gate and a security guard was a ghetto. My father was listening now. "Go on." "It is classic behavior of someone suffering from mental decline," Kyle said, weaving the web. "Hoarding resources, paranoia, antisocial tendencies, inability to manage her own affairs properly. If she is sitting on an asset worth money and refusing to leverage it to help her family in a crisis, that is not just selfishness. That is irrationality. That is incapacity." My stomach turned. I watched as these two men who had squandered every privilege they had ever been given plotted to strip me of my autonomy. "You are talking about a conservatorship," my father said. His voice wasn't shocked. It was calculating. Kyle nodded. "Like they did with that pop star. Only this is easier. Zara doesn't have fans. She doesn't have a platform. She is a recluse. If we petition the court, if we present the evidence of her lifestyle, her erratic behavior, her refusal to engage with reality, we could get emergency temporary guardianship. We could take control of her assets to manage them for her own good." "For her own good," my father repeated, testing the words. "Yes," Kyle said, growing excited. "We would be doing her a favor. Clearly she is overwhelmed. That is why she lashed out at the party. She is crying out for help. As her father, it is your duty to step in. Once we have power of attorney, we can liquidate the land, pay off the mortgage, and put the rest in a trust to care for her." My father walked back to his desk. He sat down and folded his hands. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face. "You know, he said I have a friend at the courthouse. Judge Higgins. We play golf on Sundays, and I can get Dr. Arrington to sign off on a psychiatric evaluation based on my testimony. He owes me a favor for getting his son into the university." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a conspiracy. They were planning to weaponize the legal system against me. They were going to use their titles, their connections, and their social standing to paint me as a mentally unstable spinster who needed a daddy to manage her money. "She will fight it," Kyle warned. "Let her," my father said, waving his hand dismissively. "Who is she going to hire? Some strip mall lawyer? She barely has 2 nickels to rub together. I have the best legal team in Atlanta on retainer. We will crush her in court. We will frame it as a tragic family intervention. The loving father stepping in to save his wayward daughter. The court loves that narrative." I watched them for a long time. I watched them toast to their brilliant plan. I watched them laugh, relieved that they had found a victim to sacrifice to save their own skins. They thought I was weak. They thought I was poor. They thought I was alone. I closed the laptop gently. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't cry. The time for emotions had passed. Now was the time for execution. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had on speed dial. "Darnell," I said when he answered. "Ms. Harrison." Darnell's deep voice replied. He was the head of legal for Green Horizon, a shark in a $3,000 suit who had graduated top of his class at Harvard Law. "What can I do for you?" I need you to prepare a defense strategy, I said, looking out at the city I helped build. My father is about to file for a conservatorship against me. He is going to claim I am mentally incompetent and try to seize the South Fulton land deed. There was a silence on the other end, then a low chuckle. He is going to try to seize the airport buffer zone, the land currently under federal contract review. Exactly, I said. That is a federal crime. Darnell said, his voice sharpening. Attempting to interfere with a government contractor through fraudulent legal means. We could bury him under so much litigation his grandchildren would be paying legal fees. No, I said. I don't want to stop him. Not yet. Darnell paused. I don't understand. Let him file, I said. Let him go to court. Let him stand in front of a judge and swear under oath that I am incompetent. Let him stake his entire reputation on this lie. I want him to believe he has won. I want him to feel the keys in his hand. And then Darnell asked. And then I said, I want you to represent me. But not as the corporate attorney for Green Horizon. I want you to dress down. Look like a public defender. Look like the kind of lawyer a gardener could afford. Make them overconfident. Make them sloppy. I understand, Darnell said. You want a public execution. I want Justice Darnell. And in this family, justice is a dish best served publicly. Oh, and Darnell. Yes, Ms. Harrison. Buy the mortgage note on my father's house today. Pay the bank the full outstanding balance plus the penalties. Do it through the shell company. I want to be the one holding the foreclosure notice when the gavel drops. Consider it done. I hung up the phone. I looked at the reflection of myself in the darkened window. I saw the braids, the hoodie, the face that my father was so ashamed of. He wanted a narrative. He wanted a story about a crazy poor daughter who needed saving. I was going to give him a story, all right. But it wasn't going to be the one he expected. It was going to be a tragedy. His tragedy. I turned back to my work. I had an empire to run, and now I had a trap to set. The game was on, and they had no idea they were playing against the house, and the house always wins. The morning the subpoena arrived, I was standing atop a 30-foot mound of compacted soil at the Green Horizon Primary Processing Facility in South Fulton. To the untrained eye, it looked like a landfill. To me, it looked like an engineering marvel. Below me, a fleet of 20 bulldozers moved in a synchronized ballet, pushing layers of organic waste into the new bioreactor cells I had designed. The air smelled of diesel and wet earth, a scent that most people turned their noses up at, but which smelled like pure profit to me. I pressed the button on my walkie-talkie. Team 4, you are drifting too close to the liner on the west sector. Pull back 3 degrees or we risk a breach. Copy that, boss, the foreman crackled back immediately. They respected me here, not because of my last name or who my father was, but because I knew every inch of this dirt better than they did. I watched as a white sheriff's department cruiser navigated the rough gravel road leading up to the site office. This wasn't unusual. We worked closely with the county on compliance issues, so seeing law enforcement wasn't a cause for alarm. I didn't think much of it until the foreman radioed me again. Boss, there is a deputy here. He says he is looking for a Zara Harrison. He says it is personal. My stomach tightened. I climbed down the scaffolding, wiping the red clay dust from my hands onto my cargo pants. I walked toward the portable office trailer where the deputy was waiting, sweating in the Georgia heat. He looked uncomfortable, eyeing the heavy machinery with suspicion. When I approached, he looked past me, scanning for someone else. Can I help you, officer? I asked. I am looking for Zara Harrison, he said, glancing at my muddy boots and the safety vest I was wearing over my hoodie. Is she in the office? I am Zara Harrison, I said. He blinked, looking me up and down. You are the one named in the file. I nodded. He reached into his cruiser and pulled out a thick envelope. Zara Harrison, you are hereby served with a petition for emergency conservatorship and a temporary restraining order regarding the disposal of assets. You need to sign here. I took the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name in the dust on his clipboard. He handed me the envelope, gave me a look that was a mix of pity and confusion, and drove away. I stood there in the middle of my empire holding the paperwork that claimed I was too incompetent to run my own life. I ripped open the seal. I began to read. The language was brutal. It was surgical. It was entirely my father's voice filtered through a lawyer's pen. The petitioner, Dr. Lawrence Harrison, alleges that the respondent Zara Harrison suffers from severe mental decline, evidenced by a lifestyle inconsistent with her upbringing and education. The respondent exhibits hoarding tendencies, refuses to engage in appropriate social behavior, and lives in squalor despite coming from a prominent family. The respondent has demonstrated an inability to manage financial affairs, necessitating immediate intervention to prevent the loss of ancestral property. Squalor, inability, mental decline. They were using my choice to live modestly as proof of insanity. They were using my work clothes as evidence of a breakdown. They were weaponizing my rejection of their materialism to strip me of my rights. I walked into my office trailer and locked the door. I threw the papers on my desk right next to the blueprints for the $85 million airport expansion contract. The irony was suffocating. My father wanted to take over my finances because he thought I was poor, while I was sitting on a deal that could buy his precious university 3 times over. I sat in my chair and took a deep breath. I could end this now. I could call my father and email him my bank statements. I could drive to his house in my Porsche, which I kept in a private garage downtown, and show him the deed to the penthouse. I could hire the most expensive firm in the city and counter-sue him for defamation. But that would be too easy. That would be a battle of wallets, and while I would win, he would spin it. He would say he made a mistake. He would play the victim. He would say he was just a concerned father who didn't know better. The narrative would survive. No, I needed to destroy the narrative. I needed him to stand in open court and say these things under oath. I needed him to be so confident, so arrogant that he exposed his own greed for the world to see. I picked up my phone. I didn't call a crisis management team. I called Darnell. Darnell Washington was the chief legal officer of Green Horizon. He was a man who stood 6'4", wore Savile Row suits, and had a law degree from Yale. He was terrifying in a boardroom. He had negotiated the city waste management contracts that made us untouchable. Darnell, I said when he picked up, "We have a situation." "What kind of situation, boss?" he asked. "Compliance issue." "EPA. Personal," I said. "My father just served me with conservatorship papers. He claims I am mentally unfit because I dress like a construction worker. He wants to seize the South Fulton land." There was a long silence on the line. Then Darnell let out a low, dangerous sound. "He wants to take the airport buffer zone. Does he know you own the company that just won the bid to develop it?" "No," I said. "He thinks I am a broke gardener who inherited a swamp." "This is frivolous," Darnell said, his voice clipping into professional mode. "I can have this dismissed in an hour. I will file a motion for summary judgment. I will present your financials under seal." "No," I interrupted. "Do not file for dismissal." Darnell paused. "Excuse me. I want to go to court, Darnell. I want a hearing. I want him to take the stand. And I want you to represent me." "I would be honored," he said. "I will clear my schedule. I will bring the full litigation team. We will shock and awe them." "No," I said again. "That is exactly what I do not want." Darnell listened to me carefully. "I do not want the Yale graduate Darnell today. I do not want the shark in the Italian suit. If my father sees a high-powered attorney standing next to me, he will get suspicious. He will wonder how I can afford you. He might get scared and withdraw the petition." "Then what do you want?" Darnell asked, sounding confused. "I want you to play a role," I said. "I want you to represent me as a court-appointed public defender, or at least I want you to look like one." There was a pause. "You want me to dress down? I want you to look like you slept in your car, Darnell. I want you to wear that old suit you keep in the back of your closet for painting your house. I want you to carry a briefcase with a broken handle. I want you to take the bus to the courthouse so my father sees you walking from the bus stop, Zara Darnell said slowly. You want me to tank the first impression. I want them to underestimate us, I explained. I want my father and his fancy lawyer to look at us and see a slam dunk. I want them to think they are fighting a crazy woman and her incompetent, overworked lawyer. I want them to get lazy. I want them to get arrogant. Because when they are arrogant, they will say things on the record that they can never take back. I could hear Darnell processing this. He was a brilliant strategist and he began to see the picture I was painting. You want to bait them, he said. You want to lure them into a perjury trap. I want to destroy the very idea that I am the embarrassment, I said. I want to embarrass him so thoroughly that he can never show his face in his social circles again. Can you do it? Can you put your ego aside for one day and play the fool? Darnell laughed. A deep, rich laugh. Zara, for you and for the chance to humiliate a man who judges people by their clothes. I will wear a burlap sack. I will look so disheveled the bailiff will try to search me for weapons. Good, I said. The hearing is in 3 days. Do not file any evidence beforehand. Do not submit a witness list. Let them think we are unprepared. Let them think we are drowning. I hung up the phone. I looked out the window of the trailer at the mountain of trash being turned into energy. My father looked at me and saw garbage. He didn't understand that in my world garbage was just a resource in the wrong place, and he was about to learn that the hard way. I spent the rest of the day working. I didn't go home to cry. I didn't panic. I went out and inspected the liner welds on the east sector. I signed payroll checks for 150 employees. I negotiated a fuel surcharge with our logistics partner. I ran my business. But in the back of my mind, I was already in that courtroom. I was visualizing the look on my father's face. That night, I went to my penthouse. I stood in my walk-in closet looking at the rows of designer clothes I rarely wore. I had Balmain blazers, Prada heels, silk blouses. I could have worn any of them to court. I could have walked in there looking like the CEO I was. Instead, I reached for a pair of clean but faded khaki pants and a simple gray sweater. I found a pair of scuffed loafers. I would give them exactly what they wanted to see: the scapegoat, the failure, the disappointment. I would let them build their entire case on the visual of my poverty. And then when they reached for the gavel to seal my fate, I would pull the rug out from under them so hard the entire foundation of the Harrison family would crack. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Kyle. We are just doing this because we love you, Zara. Please don't fight it. It will be easier for everyone if you just accept the help. I didn't reply. I just deleted the message. Help. They called it help. I called it a hostile takeover. And unlike my father, I knew how to defend against a takeover. You don't fight it at the gate. You let the enemy into the lobby. You let them get comfortable. You let them think they own the building. And then you lock the doors and turn off the lights. The conference room at Harrison Tate and Reynolds was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space on the 35th floor, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city I secretly owned pieces of. The table was a slab of polished mahogany, so long it felt like a runway, and the leather chairs were worth more than the car I had driven here. My father sat at the head of the table, flanked by Kyle, and a man I recognized as Preston Giles, the most expensive family law attorney in the state. Preston was wearing a bespoke suit that screamed billable hours, and he looked at me with the kind of boredom reserved for pro bono cases he wished he didn't have to take. I walked in keeping my head down, clutching a frayed canvas tote bag to my chest. Beside me shuffled Darnell. He was magnificent in his commitment to the role. He had found a polyester suit that was 2 sizes too big, the color of questionable mustard. His tie was stained with what looked like coffee, and he was carrying a briefcase that was held together with duct tape. He looked nervous, sweating profusely, and bowing slightly to everyone in the room. "Mr. Harrison, gentlemen," Darnell stammered, dropping a few papers from his overflowing briefcase as he tried to pull out a chair for me. "Oh, apologies. So sorry." Let me just get that. He scrambled under the table to retrieve the files. My father watched him with open disgust, his upper lip curling. Kyle snickered behind his hand. Preston didn't even blink. He just checked his Rolex. Please sit down and stop making a scene, my father said, his voice dripping with ice. We have limited time. I sat. I made sure to hunch my shoulders to look small and overwhelmed. I looked at the glass of water in front of me and didn't touch it, acting as if I didn't deserve it. So Preston began opening a sleek leather folder. We are here to discuss the petition for emergency conservatorship filed by Dr. Harrison. However, my client is a generous man. He loves his daughter. He wishes to avoid the public spectacle of a mental competency hearing. Therefore, we have prepared a settlement offer. Kyle leaned forward. He was the designated good cop today. He put on his best sympathetic face, the one he used when he was trying to convince investors that his latest crypto failure was actually a market correction. Zara, look, he said softly. We know you are struggling. We know living in that neighborhood, doing that hard labor, it takes a toll. We are not trying to hurt you. We are trying to protect you. I looked up at him, widening my eyes. Protect me. Yes, Kyle said, sliding a piece of paper across the mahogany. We are willing to buy the South Fulton property from you. Right now, today. We know it is just a burden to you, the taxes, the upkeep of a swamp. It is too much for one person to handle, especially someone in your situation. I looked at the paper. It was a transfer of deed agreement. And there at the bottom was a cashier's check. $30,000, Kyle said, tapping the check. That is a lot of money, Zara. Think about what you could do with that. You could get a new apartment. You could buy a reliable car. You could take a break from digging ditches. 30,000, I whispered, feigning shock. It is more than fair, Preston interjected. The land is undeveloped wetlands, practically worthless. Dr. Harrison is offering this out of the goodness of his heart to give you a nest egg. Darnell cleared his throat. He stood up, knocking his knee against the table, causing the water pitcher to wobble. Everyone flinched. Excuse me, sirs, Darnell squeaked, adjusting his crooked glasses. I did a little reading on the zoning laws in South Fulton. And, well, I might be wrong, I am just a general practitioner, you know. But isn't there some development happening down there? Maybe we should get an appraisal. My father slammed his hand on the table. For God's sake, he is not paying you to think he is paying you to sign. Sit down. Darnell shrank back into his chair, muttering apologies. I am sorry, Dr. Harrison. Just trying to be thorough. Listen to me, Zara, Kyle said, ignoring Darnell. If you sign this paper transferring the land to the family trust, we will drop the conservatorship petition. No court, no doctors, no public record of your instability. We will take the 30,000, and I will personally invest it for you. I will put it into a high-yield portfolio. You won't have to worry about managing money ever again. You will just get a check every month, safe, secure. The arrogance was breathtaking. Kyle, who had lost 6 figures of my father's money, was offering to manage my finances. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him that my personal portfolio grew by $30,000 every hour. But I needed the confession. I needed them to say the quiet part out loud. I reached out and touched the check. My hand trembled. I made sure the microphone taped beneath my sweater was unobstructed. But, Dad, I said, turning to my father. He was refusing to look at me. He was staring out the window, tapping his fingers impatiently. Dad, look at me. He slowly turned his head. His eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth. What, Zara? Do you really think I am crazy? I asked. My voice cracked perfectly. Is that why you are doing this? Do you really believe I am sick? Because if you think I am sick, why are you asking for the land? Why aren't you asking about my health? He sighed, a long, weary sound of a man dealing with a nuisance. This isn't about feelings, Zara. This is about business. But the petition I pressed, It says I am a danger to myself. It says I live in squalor. If I sign this, will you help me get better? Will you come visit me? Kyle jumped in. Of course, Z. We will all. My father cut him off. Be quiet, Kyle. He leaned over the table, his face inches from mine. Listen to me, you ungrateful girl. I do not care about your little dramatic episodes. I do not care if you want to live in the mud like a pig. What I care about is that asset sitting in your name rotting away while this family faces a liquidity crisis. That land is the only thing of value you have ever possessed, and you are too stupid to know what to do with it. So it is just about the money, I whispered. You don't care if I am mentally competent or not. I care that you are an obstruction, he hissed. I care that you are holding this family hostage with your stubbornness. Now, are you going to sign the damn paper and take the charity we are offering, or do I have to drag you in front of a judge and have you declared an invalid? Because I will do it, Zara. I will have you committed if it means getting that deed. I will not let you ruin me. I held his gaze. The recording device against my skin felt hot. He had said it. He had admitted that the conservatorship was a sham, a tool for extortion. I don't know, I stammered, pulling my hand back from the check. It is just so fast. Grandma said, Grandma is dead, he shouted, standing up. And she was a fool to leave it to you. She did it to spite me, while I am correcting her mistake. Preston the lawyer looked uncomfortable for the first time. Dr. Harrison, perhaps we should dial back the... No, my father roared. She needs to understand. Zara, look at you. Look at your lawyer. Look at this pathetic display. You cannot win this. You are a gardener fighting a dean. You are a nobody fighting a Harrison. Sign the paper. I looked at Darnell. He was looking at his shoes, but I saw the slight nod. We had it. I need to think, I said, standing up abruptly. I grabbed my tote bag. I can't sign today. I need to pray on it. My father looked like he was about to hurdle the table and strangle me. Kyle looked panicked. Zara, wait, Kyle pleaded. The offer expires today. The 30,000. I am sorry, I said, backing toward the door. I just need 1 day. Just 1 day. My father pointed a finger at me. You have until the hearing on Friday. If you walk into that courtroom without that deed signed, I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work in this town again. I will bury you so deep in legal fees you will be begging to clean toilets. I ran out of the room. Darnell scrambled after me, dropping his briefcase one last time, spilling papers everywhere, muttering apologies as he gathered them up. We practically ran to the elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing us off from the hostility of the 35th floor. As soon as the elevator started to descend, the transformation happened. Darnell straightened up. He adjusted his tie. The nervous tick in his eye vanished. He pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the sweat from his forehead. That, Darnell said in his rich baritone voice, was the most offensive thing I have ever experienced. And I practiced law in criminal court for 10 years. Did you get it? I asked, my voice returning to its normal commanding timbre. Darnell tapped his briefcase. Crystal clear. He admitted to extortion, fraud, and abuse of process. He admitted the conservatorship is solely for financial gain. We have him, Zara. We have him cold. I leaned against the mirrored wall of the elevator. I saw myself. I didn't look like a victim anymore. He offered me $30,000, I said softly. For a property worth $85 million, Darnell mused. That is quite the profit margin. He really thinks I am stupid, Darnell. He looked me in the eye and thought he was manipulating a child. He is blinded by his own prejudice, Darnell said. He sees the costume, not the actor. He sees the cover, not the book. That will be his downfall. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Are you ready for court? Darnell asked. I walked out into the lobby past the security guards who nodded respectfully at Darnell's suddenly confident stride. I am not just ready, I said. I am looking forward to it. Let him have his day in court. It will be the last day he ever feels powerful. I walked out into the sunlight. I had the tape. I had the deed. And in 48 hours, I would have the verdict. My father wanted to talk about embarrassment. He wanted to talk about shame. He had no idea. I pulled out my phone and checked the market. Green Horizon stock was up 3 points. I smiled. Friday couldn't come fast enough. The morning after the disastrous meeting at the law firm, I went back to the one place where the chaos of my family could not touch me. The executive suite of Green Horizon Solutions. It was quiet here. The only sound was the low hum of the server room down the hall and the soft click of my keyboard as I reviewed the quarterly projections. I had swapped my hoodie for a silk blouse and a blazer, not because I expected visitors, but because sometimes the clothes help you remember who you actually are when the world tries to tell you otherwise. My father thought he had given me an ultimatum. He thought he had sent me scurrying back to my hole to pray for salvation. He had no idea that while he was likely sipping his morning coffee and congratulating himself on his toughness, I was approving a $2 million payroll transfer. But Lawrence Harrison was not a man who left things to chance. He was a man who believed in scorching the earth. Around 10 o'clock, my personal cell phone, the number only a select few had, began to buzz. It was not a text. It was a call from Marcus Washington, the Dean of Operations at Spelman College. Marcus was an old friend and one of my oldest clients. My company handled all the waste management and landscaping for his entire campus. I picked up the phone. "Good morning, Marcus," I said, leaning back in my chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Zara," Marcus said, his voice sounding strained. "I just had the most disturbing phone call. I did not know if I should call you, but, given what the man said, I felt you needed to know." I closed my laptop. Let me guess. Was it a man with a baritone voice who likes to use words like prestige and lineage? Was it my father? There was a pause on the line. "Yes," Marcus said. "It was Dr. Harrison. Zara, he called me on my private line. He sounded frantic. He told me that he heard I was employing you for some groundskeeping work." I let out a dry laugh. Groundskeeping work? Technically, my company managed the grounds, so in his mind that meant I was pushing the mower. "What did he say, Marcus?" "He told me to fire you," Marcus said, sounding offended on my behalf. "He said that you have been exhibiting signs of kleptomania. He told me that you stole silver from his home during an anniversary party. He said you are mentally unstable and that he could not in good conscience let a friend have someone like that on his campus. He said you might be a danger to the students." The silence in my office felt heavy. Kleptomania. Danger to students. He was not just trying to cut off my income. He was trying to criminalize me. He was trying to destroy my reputation so thoroughly that I would be unemployable. If I really were just a gardener, a rumor like that from a respected academic would end my career. I would starve. "I am sorry you had to hear that, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady. Zara, Marcus continued. I tried to tell him. I tried to tell him that Green Horizon has been our vendor for 5 years. I tried to tell him that I deal with your regional managers, not you directly. But he wouldn't listen. He just kept shouting that I needed to terminate the contract with the Harrison girl immediately if I wanted to maintain good relations with his university. "He threatened your partnership," I asked. "He implied it," Marcus said. "Zara, what is going on? Do you want me to set him straight? I can call the board. I can shut this down right now." "No," I said quickly. "Marcus, do not tell him the truth." "But he is slandering you," Marcus argued. "He is trying to ruin you." "I know," I said, "and I need him to believe he has succeeded." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the traffic crawling along Peachtree Street. "Marcus, I need you to do me a favor. It is going to sound strange, but I need you to call him back." "Call him back?" Marcus asked. "Yes, call him back and tell him you did it. Tell him you fired me. Tell him you do not want a thief on your campus. Tell him you terminated the contract with the girl he warned you about." Zara, are you serious? Marcus asked. You want me to lie to a dean? I want you to feed his ego, Marcus. I need him to walk into court on Friday thinking I am destitute. I need him to think he has stripped me of everything. If he thinks I still have allies, he will be cautious. If he thinks I am broken, he will be reckless. There was a long pause. Then I heard Marcus sigh. You are playing a dangerous game, Zara. I am not playing Marcus. I am finishing it. Can I count on you? You know you can, Marcus said. I will make the call, but you owe me a steak dinner when this is over. Deal, I said. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from a cold, simmering anger. My father was willing to label me a thief. He was willing to brand his own daughter a criminal just to get his hands on a piece of land. The phone rang again 5 minutes later. This time it was the owner of the luxury condo complex in Buckhead, where my father lived. My company held the contract for their waste disposal and recycling. Ms. Harrison, the manager said, sounding confused. I just got a call from a resident. Dr. Harrison, he says he is your father. Let me guess, I said. He told you I steal packages from the mailroom. He said you were seen rooting through the dumpsters and taking residents' personal information, the manager said. He demanded we ban you from the property. He said if we see you, we should call the police because you are off your medication. I closed my eyes. Off my medication. He was building the case for the insanity plea brick by brick. Mr. Henderson, I said, do me a favor, call him back, tell him you have banned me. Tell him you have put my picture at the security desk. But Ms. Harrison, you own the company that services the building. Henderson stammered. Just tell him what he wants to hear, I ordered. Tell him I was crying when security escorted me off the premises. I understand, Henderson said. The calls kept coming all morning. He called the bank manager at the local branch where I had opened my first account when I was 18. He called the pastor of our old church where my company donated the flowers for Sunday service. He called the head of the local Rotary Club. He was systematic. He went through his Rolodex calling anyone he thought might have given me a job or a handout. He told the same lies. Theft, mental illness, drugs. He was trying to suffocate me. He wanted to make sure that when Friday came, I would have no money, no friends, and no dignity left. He wanted me to crawl into that courtroom and beg him to save me. By noon, I had instructed 6 of my business partners to lie to my father. I had orchestrated my own public downfall. At 1 o'clock, my personal cell phone pinged with a text message. It was from my father. It was short, brutal. I heard you lost your jobs. Word travels fast when you are a liability. Don't worry. The offer is still on the table until Friday morning. Sign the papers and we can stop this. I can get you help. I can get you into a facility where they can treat your condition. I stared at the screen. A facility. He was threatening to lock me up. He was not just trying to take my money, he was threatening my freedom. I didn't reply. I couldn't. If I typed anything, my rage would burn through the screen. I called Darnell. Did you get the calls I asked? Darnell let out a low whistle. He called the State Bar Association Zara. He tried to file a complaint against me. He said I was taking advantage of a mentally incompetent client. He tried to get me disbarred. I gripped the edge of my desk. He went after you. He tried? Darnell said. Luckily, the clerk at the Bar Association is my cousin. She called me laughing. She asked why a dean was filing a complaint against a public defender who doesn't exist. He is desperate, Darnell, I said. He is scorching the earth. He thinks he is winning, Darnell said. That is the important part. I just got a notification from the court clerk. Your father's lawyer submitted an amended witness list. He isn't calling any doctors. He isn't calling any experts. Why not, I asked. Because he thinks he doesn't need them, Darnell explained. He thinks he has destroyed your credibility so thoroughly that he just needs to stand up there and say you are crazy and everyone will believe him. He is arrogant, Zara. He is walking into a trap with his eyes closed. Friday, I said. Friday, Darnell confirmed. I spent the rest of the afternoon staring at the city. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The man who had raised me, The man whose approval I had craved for 30 years was currently on a crusade to destroy me. And the saddest part was, he didn't even know who he was fighting. He was fighting a ghost. He was fighting a version of me that existed only in his head. The weak Zara. The poor Zara. The stupid Zara. He had no idea that the real Zara was sitting in a corner office watching his every move, controlling the people he thought were his allies. Around 4 o'clock, I left the office. I didn't go home. I drove to the South Fulton site, the land my grandmother had left me. I parked my truck on the ridge overlooking the marsh. In the distance, I could see the survey flags marking where the new runway would go. I could see the future. My father saw a swamp. I saw a legacy. I got out of the truck and walked down to the water's edge. The air was thick with heat and insects. I remembered coming here with Grandma Hattie when I was a little girl. She would hold my hand and tell me that land was the only thing that lasted. "They can hate you, Zara," she would say. "They can lie about you, but they cannot take the dirt from under your feet if you hold the deed." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled $20 bill Kyle had given me at the party. I had kept it, a reminder of my worth in their eyes. I let it go. The wind caught it and carried it out into the muddy water. It floated for a second, then sank. I was done being their victim. I was done being their secret. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my father. "I hope you are hungry. I heard the food pantry is closed on Thursdays." I looked at the message and smiled. A cold, hard smile. I wasn't hungry, Dad. I was starving. But not for food. I was starving for justice. And on Friday, I was going to feast. I got back in my truck and drove toward the city. I had one more stop to make before the trial. I needed to visit the bank, not to withdraw money, but to finalize the purchase of a certain mortgage note that had just become available. My father wanted to play landlord. He wanted to talk about ownership. Fine. Let's talk about ownership. I dialed Darnell one last time. "Darnell," I said. "Make sure the foreclosure notice is printed on the heavy bond paper, the kind with the gold seal." Why, Darnell asked. Because I said merging onto the highway. When I hand it to him, I want him to feel the weight of it. Friday arrived with a humidity that stuck to your skin like a bad memory. I drove my truck to the courthouse, parking it in the public lot 3 blocks away, just as my father would have wanted. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. I was wearing clean clothes, but they were simple. A pair of gray slacks from a discount store, a white button-down shirt that was slightly too large, and a cardigan that had seen better days. I looked exactly like what they claimed I was, a woman who had given up, a woman who was drifting through life without purpose or pride. I walked toward the courthouse steps, keeping my head down, clutching my canvas bag. I expected the usual quiet bustle of a Friday morning docket. Lawyers checking their phones, defendants smoking nervous cigarettes, clerks rushing with files. Instead, I saw a circus. My father stood near the main entrance looking like a statesman on the campaign trail. He was wearing his best navy suit, the one with the silk pocket square. Next to him was Kyle looking solemn and supportive. And surrounding them were 3 reporters from the local news stations and a photographer from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I stopped in my tracks. He had called the press. Of course he had. He wasn't just here to take my land. He was here to rehabilitate his image. He was going to spin this conservatorship as a noble act of charity, the distinguished dean saving his troubled daughter. It was the perfect cover story for the financial ruin he was facing. If the news reported he was taking control of my assets to help me, no one would look closely at why he needed the money so badly. I watched as he dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief while talking to a reporter. He was performing. He was turning my life into a human interest puff piece. Then I saw Darnell. He was walking up the sidewalk from the direction of the bus stop, just as we had planned. He looked even more disheveled than he had in the law office. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was crooked, and he was sweating profusely. He stopped to check his watch, looked confused, and then hurried toward me. Ms. Harrison Darnell panted loudly enough for the reporters to hear. "I am so sorry I am late." The number 42 bus broke down on Peachtree. I had to walk the last 6 blocks. Did I miss roll call? I saw the photographer snap a picture of us. The contrast must have been striking. The elegant, grieving father on the steps, and the daughter with her frantic bus-riding lawyer on the sidewalk. "It is okay, Mr. Washington," I whispered, playing my part. "We are on time." We walked up the steps, passing my father. He didn't even look at me. He just looked at the reporters, sighed tragically, and gestured toward the doors as if carrying a heavy cross. Inside courtroom 4B was packed. My father had not only invited the press, but he had also brought supporters. I saw a few members of his church board. I saw the vice dean of the university. He wanted witnesses. He wanted an audience for his triumph. We took our seats at the defendant's table. Darnell knocked over his chair as he sat down, causing a loud clatter that made the bailiff glare at us. Across the aisle at the plaintiff's table, my father sat flanked by Preston Giles and 2 junior associates. They laid out their files with military precision. They looked like a firing squad. Judge Reynolds entered the room. He was a stern man with graying hair and a no-nonsense reputation. I knew him, though he didn't know me. My company had sponsored the youth rehabilitation program he championed, but I had always donated anonymously. To him, I was just a name on a docket. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. We stood. The tension in the room was suffocating. Judge Reynolds took his seat and adjusted his glasses. "We are here for the matter of Harrison versus Harrison. Petition for emergency conservatorship. I have reviewed the filings. Mr. Giles, you may proceed with your opening." Preston Giles stood up. He buttoned his jacket and walked to the center of the room. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at the gallery. He looked at the reporters. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth as velvet. "This is not a trial. This is a rescue mission. We are not here to attack Ms. Zara Harrison. We are here to save her." He gestured toward me with a pitying, open hand. "Zara Harrison is a woman of potential. She was given every advantage: private schools, a degree from Spelman College, a supportive, loving family. And yet for the past 10 years, she has been in a spiral of decline. She has rejected society. She has rejected her family. And most concerningly, she has rejected reality." Preston walked back to his table and picked up a large exhibit board. He placed it on an easel facing the judge. "Exhibit A," Preston announced. It was a blown-up photograph of me. I remembered the day it was taken. I was at the landfill site troubleshooting a hydraulic failure on one of the compactors. I was covered in grease. My hair was tied back in a messy bun. I was kneeling in the dirt holding a wrench. "Your Honor," Preston said, "this is a 35-year-old woman. This is not a hobby. This is her life. She spends her days in filth. She chooses to work in garbage. Now there is dignity in labor, of course. But for a woman with her education, with her background, to choose this existence, it speaks to a severe disconnect. It speaks to a lack of self-worth that borders on pathology." He flipped the board. Exhibit B. This was a photo of me eating lunch. I was sitting on the tailgate of my truck eating a sandwich I had bought from a food truck. I looked tired. I was staring into space, thinking about a supply chain issue. "Look at this image," Preston urged. "She eats alone. She eats on the side of the road like a vagrant. She has no friends. She has no social circle. While her family gathers for holidays and celebrations, she isolates herself in the dirt." I sat there, keeping my face blank. Inside, I was seething. They were taking my hard work, my dedication, my hands-on leadership, and twisting it into sickness. They looked at a woman solving complex engineering problems and saw a woman playing in the mud. They looked at a CEO taking a quick lunch break and saw a lonely vagrant. It was classism in its purest, ugliest form. To them, if you weren't wearing a suit, you weren't sane. Preston continued pacing back and forth. Your Honor, we have statements from members of the community, people who have tried to help her, people she has pushed away. She hoards her meager earnings. She refuses to spend money on basic necessities like decent clothing or a safe vehicle. She drives a truck that is falling apart. She lives in a neighborhood that no one in her family would dare visit after dark. He paused for effect. We submit that Zara Harrison is suffering from an undiagnosed cognitive decline. She is unable to recognize the squalor she lives in. She is unable to make rational decisions about her assets. Specifically, she holds the deed to a property in South Fulton. A property she has allowed to sit fallow. A property she refuses to develop or sell despite her own financial struggles. Preston walked over to my father and placed a hand on his shoulder. Lawrence Harrison is a pillar of this community. He is a dean. He is a leader. It breaks his heart to see his daughter this way. He is asking the court for the authority to step in, to take on the burden of managing her affairs, to ensure she has proper housing, proper medical care, and a life of dignity. He wants to bring her home. My father wiped a tear from his eye. The reporters scribbled furiously. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Preston sat down. The room was silent. The weight of their judgment pressed down on me. Mr. Washington, Judge Reynolds said, looking at Darnell. Do you have an opening statement? Darnell stood up. He fumbled with his notes, dropping a few index cards on the floor. He bent down to pick them up, hitting his head on the table as he rose. A few people in the gallery giggled. My father shook his head in disgust. Yes, Your Honor, Darnell stammered. He adjusted his glasses, which were sliding down his nose. We contest the petition. My client, Miss Harrison, she is a nice lady. She likes her job. She likes gardening. Preston rolled his eyes. Kyle smirked. Is that it, Mr. Washington? The judge asked, sounding unimpressed. Well, yes, Your Honor, Darnell said, shuffling his feet. We just think, she is an adult. She can do what she wants. Even if it is, dirty. He sat down abruptly. It was pathetic. It was brilliant. My father leaned over to Preston and whispered something. They both smiled. They thought they had already won. They thought Darnell was an incompetent fool who had just handed them the victory. Call your first witness. Judge Reynolds sighed. We call Dr. Lawrence Harrison to the stand, Preston announced. My father stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the witness stand with the gravitas of a man accepting a Nobel Prize. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Preston approached the stand. Dr. Harrison, thank you for being here. I know this is difficult for you. It is the hardest thing I have ever done, my father said, his voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. I love my daughter. I remember when she was born. She was so bright, so full of promise. When did you notice the change? Preston asked. It was gradual, my father said, looking sadly at me. After college, she stopped coming to family events. She started wearing these rags. She started obsessing over trash. Literally trash. She would talk about landfills and compost like they were gold. I tried to guide her. I tried to get her a job at the university. I tried to introduce her to respectable young men. But she pushed everyone away. And her financial situation? Preston asked. My father sighed. It is a disaster. She refuses to accept help. I have offered her money. I have offered to pay for a new car. She refuses. She clings to this poverty like a security blanket. And that land my mother left her, she treats it like a shrine. She won't let anyone touch it. She doesn't have the money to pay the taxes on it, I am sure. I have been terrified that the county is going to seize it. I just want to save her inheritance before she loses it all. He looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, all she does is embarrass me. Not because she is poor, but because she chooses to be less than she is. I cannot stand by and watch her waste her life in the mud. I have a duty as a father. The courtroom was captivated. I heard sniffles from the church ladies in the back. The reporters were nodding. The narrative was set. The loving father, the crazy daughter, the tragic waste of potential. Preston turned to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Reynolds looked at Darnell. "Mr. Washington, your witness." Darnell stood up slowly. He didn't look like a bumbler anymore. He didn't drop any papers. He buttoned his mustard-colored jacket and walked toward the witness stand. He walked with a rhythm I recognized. It was the walk of a predator circling its prey. My father watched him with a look of mild amusement. He was expecting a soft-ball question. He was expecting incompetence. Darnell stopped in front of the stand. He looked at my father for a long moment. Then he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Dr. Harrison, Darnell began, his voice dropping an octave, losing the nervous stutter completely. "You stated that my client embarrasses you. You stated that she lives in squalor. You stated that she has no financial sense." "That is correct," my father said, narrowing his eyes slightly at the change in Darnell's tone. "And you stated under oath that your only motivation for this conservatorship is to protect her assets and ensure her well-being." "Absolutely," my father said. Darnell nodded. He walked back to our table and picked up a single piece of paper. It wasn't wrinkled, it was crisp. "Then can you explain to the court," Darnell said, turning back to my father, "why you applied for a catastrophic hardship loan from the Teachers Credit Union 3 days ago, listing the South Fulton property as collateral before you even had legal authority to do so?" My father froze. Preston stood up halfway. "Objection!" Preston shouted. "Relevance! It goes to motive, Your Honor," Darnell said, his voice booming through the courtroom. "If the petitioner is insolvent, his interest in my client's assets is predatory, not protective." "Overruled," Judge Reynolds said, leaning forward. "Answer the question, Dr. Harrison." My father's face went pale. I did no such thing. That is a lie." Darnell didn't blink. He reached into his briefcase. He didn't pull out a mess of papers. He pulled out a stapled document with a bank seal. "I have the loan application here, Dr. Harrison. It is signed by you, and it lists the projected sale value of the South Fulton land at $200,000. Is this your signature?" My father stared at the paper. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. The church ladies stopped sniffling. The reporters stopped writing. I might have made an inquiry," my father stammered. Just to be prepared in case you succeeded in stealing her property." Darnell finished for him. "Objection!" Preston screamed. "Sustained," the judge said. But he was looking at my father with a new expression. It wasn't pity anymore. It was suspicion. Darnell wasn't done. He walked closer to the stand. "You also stated my client lives in poverty, that she eats on the street, that she has no friends." "Yes," my father said, rallying. "Look at the pictures." "Pictures can be deceiving," Darnell said. "Tell me, Dr. Harrison, who pays your salary?" "Excuse me," my father scoffed. "The university pays my salary." "And who is the university's largest private vendor?" Darnell asked. "Who holds the exclusive contract for waste management, landscaping, and environmental compliance for your entire campus?" "I don't know," my father snapped. "I am the Dean of Arts. I don't deal with the janitors." Darnell smiled. It was a shark's smile. "You really don't know, do you?" Darnell turned to me. He nodded. It was time. I stood up. I didn't hunch. I didn't look down. I stood up straight, squaring my shoulders. I looked at my father, and for the first time in years, I let him see the real me. "Judge Reynolds," Darnell said, "permission to treat the witness as hostile, and permission to introduce new evidence regarding the financial solvency of the petitioner versus the respondent." Judge Reynolds looked at my father, then at me. He took off his glasses. Permission granted. The trap was sprung, and my father was standing right in the middle of it. Preston Giles looked like a man who was trying to bail water out of the Titanic with a teaspoon. My father's disastrous testimony had left a heavy, uncomfortable silence hanging in the courtroom, a silence that smelled distinctly of perjury. Preston needed a pivot. He needed emotion. He needed to shift the narrative away from my father's predatory loans and back to the supposed tragedy of my existence. He called my sister Bianca. Bianca rose from her seat with the practiced grace of a pageant queen. She was wearing a modest black dress that she had likely bought yesterday specifically for this occasion. It was the kind of dress a grieving widow would wear, designed to elicit immediate sympathy. She walked to the witness stand, keeping her eyes cast down, clutching a tissue in her hand, before she had even shed a tear. As she swore to tell the truth, I reached into my canvas tote bag. I didn't pull out a notebook or a messy pile of papers. I pulled out a pen. It was a Mont Blanc Meisterstück, crafted from deep black precious resin with gold-coated details. It was worth $2,000. I had bought it in Zurich 3 years ago after closing the deal on the waste management systems for the Swiss embassy. It was heavy cool to the touch and utterly out of place for a woman who was supposed to be a destitute gardener. I set the pen on the table. I didn't write anything. I just spun it slowly between my thumb and forefinger. The gold clip caught the overhead fluorescent light, sending a tiny rhythmic flash across the table. Judge Reynolds noticed. I saw his eyes flick down to the pen, then back up to my face. He narrowed his eyes slightly. He was a man who appreciated fine things. He knew exactly what that pen was. And he knew that a woman who ate lunch on the side of the road because she was broke did not carry a writing instrument that cost more than a Honda Civic. Bianca sat down, sniffing delicately into the microphone. Ms. Harrison Preston began, his voice soft and gentle. Can you describe your relationship with your sister Zara? Bianca looked at me. Her eyes were wet, swimming with artificial sorrow. I love her, Bianca choked out. She is my baby sister. We used to be so close. We shared a room growing up. I braided her hair. I helped her with her homework. But then, she just drifted away. Can you tell the court about her living situation? Preston asked. Bianca let out a sob. It is heartbreaking, truly heartbreaking. I went to visit her once a few years ago. She lives in this industrial area. It is loud. It smells like diesel and garbage. Her apartment, if you can call it that, it is just empty. No furniture, just boxes. She sleeps on a mattress on the floor. I kept spinning the pen. Bianca had visited me once 5 years ago when I had first bought the warehouse district building. I was in the middle of renovating the penthouse. She had seen the construction site downstairs and assumed I was squatting. She never made it up to the top floor where the Italian marble was being installed. She lives like a homeless person. Bianca continued, gaining confidence as the reporters scribbled in their notebooks. I have tried to give her clothes. I have tried to take her shopping. But she refuses. She wears these dirty, baggy things. It is like she wants to be invisible. It is like she is punishing us by degrading herself. And how does this affect you? Preston asked. It is humiliating, Bianca whispered, wiping a tear that managed to stay perfectly intact on her cheek. I go to galas. I attend charity events. And people ask me, Bianca, is that your sister digging up the flower beds outside? Is that your sister driving that trash truck? I have to lie. I have to say no, because I cannot bear the shame of admitting that a Harrison is living like that. I just want her to come home. I want her to be safe. She looked at my father, who nodded solemnly. It was a beautiful performance. If I didn't know she was currently dodging creditors for 3 different maxed-out credit cards, I might have believed her. Preston turned to the judge. No further questions. Judge Reynolds looked at Darnell. Your witness. Darnell stood up. He didn't rush this time. He walked over to Bianca, holding a file folder. Ms. Harrison, Darnell said, you say your sister lives in poverty. You say you want to help her. Yes, Bianca said, looking at Darnell with open disdain. We all do. Is that why you asked her for $50,000 3 days ago? Darnell asked calmly. Bianca froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Excuse me, she squeaked. On the night of your parents' anniversary, Darnell clarified, pulling a transcript from the folder. Did you or did you not ask my client to wire you $50,000 to cover a vacation to Bali because your credit cards were declined? Objection, Preston shouted. Hearsay, I have the affidavit from the travel agent regarding the declined cards, Darnell said, not even looking at Preston. And I have a witness statement from the catering staff who heard the argument in the living room. Bianca turned red. That was a loan, a temporary loan. It has nothing to do with her mental state. It has everything to do with her financial state, Darnell countered. If you believe your sister is a destitute hoarder living on a mattress, why would you ask her for $50,000? Do you often ask homeless people for luxury vacation funds? Bianca stammered. I knew she saves money. She doesn't spend it. She hoards it. That is part of her sickness. So she has $50,000, Darnell pressed. I don't know, Bianca snapped, losing her composure. She might. She works all the time. She never does anything fun. She just works in the dirt. So she is employed, she is solvent, and she has enough liquidity that you felt comfortable asking her for a large sum of money. That doesn't sound like a woman who needs a conservator. That sounds like a woman who needs better relatives, Order Judge Reynolds warned, though he was hiding a smile behind his hand. Bianca glared at me. The mask had slipped. The grieving sister was gone, replaced by the spoiled brat who had been told no. Darnell sat down. Bianca stormed off the stand, her heels clicking angrily on the floor. Preston looked desperate now. He needed a bombshell. He needed something that would make the judge forget about the loans and the hypocrisy. We call Kyle Turner to the stand, Preston announced. Kyle stood up. He buttoned his velvet blazer. He walked to the stand with a swagger that suggested he thought he was the smartest person in the room. He sat down, winked at Bianca, and turned to the lawyer. Mr. Turner, Preston said, you are Zara's brother-in-law. You have tried to mentor her, haven't you? I have, Kyle said, leaning into the microphone. I have tried to take her under my wing. I know a thing or two about finance, about business. I hate seeing her waste her life. Can you tell the court about a specific interaction you had with Zara regarding money? Preston asked. Kyle nodded solemnly. His face grew dark. This was it. The big lie. About 6 months ago, Kyle began lowering his voice to a confidential tone. Zara came to me. She was shaking. She was sweating. She looked erratic. She asked me for money. She said she was in trouble. What kind of trouble? Preston asked. She wouldn't say exactly, Kyle said. But I know the signs. I have seen it before in the streets. She was scratching her skin. Her pupils were dilated. She begged me for cash. She said she needed $500 immediately or the bad guys were coming for her. The courtroom gasped. My father covered his face with his hands. And what did you think she needed the money for? Preston asked. Drugs, Kyle stated flatly. I believe my sister-in-law is addicted to methamphetamines. That explains the weight loss. That explains the erratic behavior. That explains why she lives in squalor despite working. The money goes up her nose or into her veins. I stopped spinning the pen. I stared at Kyle. It was a breathtaking lie. He was accusing me of a felony. He was painting me as a junkie to justify stealing my land. And did you give her the money? Preston asked. Kyle sighed, the picture of a conflicted saint. I did. I know I shouldn't have enabled her. But she is family. I couldn't say no. I gave her the cash and she ran off. I haven't seen her look sober since. Preston shook his head sadly. Thank you, Mr. Turner. Your honesty is brave. Darnell stood up. He didn't wait for the judge to invite him. He walked toward Kyle with a piece of paper in his hand. Mr. Turner, Darnell said, you say you gave her cash. That is right, Kyle said. Untraceable. That is how she wanted it. $500, Darnell repeated. For drugs. Yes. Darnell placed the paper on the stand. Then, can you explain this check dated 6 months ago from your personal account made out to Zara Harrison for exactly $500? The memo line says, reimbursement. Kyle blinked. He looked at the check. I might have written a check that time. I forgot. And do you know what this check was for? Darnell asked. I told you, Kyle snapped. Drugs. She probably cashed it at a liquor store. Darnell turned to the gallery. He picked up another document. This is a receipt from Green Horizon Solutions dated the same day. It is for 500 pounds of ammonium nitrate, a high-grade organic fertilizer component. Fertilizer, Kyle scoffed. See, that is what she uses to make. Ammonium nitrate is used for large-scale commercial landscaping, Darnell interrupted. Specifically for the treatment of athletic fields. Darnell turned back to Kyle. Mr. Turner, isn't it true that 6 months ago your crypto mining startup was operating out of a rented warehouse that had a severe mold problem in the landscaping? And isn't it true that you called Zara, begging her to fix the grounds before your investors visited? And isn't it true that she bought the materials herself because your company credit card was declined and you wrote her this personal check to reimburse her for the fertilizer? Kyle's face went white. I don't recall that, he stammered. You don't recall asking your drug addict sister-in-law to save your business appearance? Darnell asked. You don't recall that she brought a crew of 10 men and fixed your drainage problem in 4 hours? No, Kyle said, sweat beading on his forehead. That is a lie. She buys drugs. Darnell looked at the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit into evidence the invoice for the fertilizer signed by Mr. Kyle Turner upon delivery. And I would also like to submit a toxicology report for my client taken yesterday morning. It is clean, not a trace of any substance. He slammed the papers down on the railing. Mr. Turner, you are under oath. You just accused a federal contractor of a felony. Do you want to recant your statement about the drugs? Or should I ask the district attorney who is sitting in the back row to open a perjury investigation right now? Kyle looked at the back of the room. He looked at my father. He looked at the judge. The arrogance drained out of him like water from a cracked vase. Maybe I was confused, Kyle whispered. Maybe it was for the fertilizer. Maybe Darnell mocked. You seem to be confused about a lot of things, like the difference between a junkie and the woman who cleaned up your mess. Darnell turned his back on him. No further questions. I picked up my Mont Blanc pen. I uncapped it. The sound was a sharp, distinct click in the silent courtroom. I wrote a single word on the notepad in front of me. Checkmate. Judge Reynolds watched me write. He looked at the pen. He looked at Kyle, who was trembling on the stand. He looked at Bianca, who was checking her makeup in a compact mirror. He looked at my father, who was staring at the table, realizing the ground was crumbling beneath him. The judge leaned forward. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked directly at me. Ms. Harrison, the judge said, we have heard a lot about you today. We have heard you are crazy. We have heard you are a drug addict. We have heard you are a hoarder. He paused. But I am looking at a woman who wears a $2,000 fountain pen like a piece of jewelry. I am looking at a woman whose lawyer just dismantled 2 witnesses with financial records that suggest she is the most solvent person in this room. My father's head snapped up. Judge Reynolds continued, I think I would like to hear from the respondent, Ms. Harrison. Would you please take the stand? I stood up. I buttoned my cardigan. I capped my pen and placed it in my pocket. I walked past my father. I didn't look at him. I walked past Kyle, who was slumping back to his seat. I took the stand. I sat down. Do you swear to tell the truth? The bailiff asked. I do, I said. My voice was clear, strong. It was the voice of a CEO, not a gardener. Judge Reynolds looked at me over his spectacles. "Ms. Harrison," he said, "your father claims you are an embarrassment. He claims you are incompetent. What do you have to say to that?" I leaned into the microphone. I looked at the reporters. I looked at the camera lens that was broadcasting this live to the local news feed. "I say, Your Honor, that it is very expensive to look this poor, and it is very exhausting cleaning up the messes of people who think they are better than you." My father stood up. "You see, she is speaking nonsense." "Sit down, Dr. Harrison," the judge barked. I continued, "My father thinks I play in the dirt. He is right, I do. But he forgot to ask who owns the dirt." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the foreclosure notice Darnell had prepared, the one on the heavy bond paper with the gold seal. "And he forgot to ask who owns the dirt his house sits on," I added. I unfolded the paper. "May I approach the bench, Your Honor? I have a new deed to submit into evidence. It concerns the property where my father currently resides." The room erupted. My father's face went from pale to a color I had never seen before. This was it, the turn, the moment the prey became the hunter. The bailiff took the heavy bond paper from my hand and walked it up to the bench. The sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floor seemed to echo in the cavernous room. Every eye was fixed on that piece of paper. My father was leaning forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table. He looked like a man watching a bomb fuse burn down, helpless to stop it, but unable to look away. Preston Giles, his expensive lawyer, looked confused. He was whispering frantically to his junior associates, but they just shrugged. They had not prepared for this. They had prepared for a poverty defense, not a hostile takeover. Judge Reynolds put on his reading glasses. He took his time. He smoothed the document out on his desk. He read the header. He read the fine print. He read the signature line. Then he looked up. He looked at me sitting calmly in the witness stand with my cheap cardigan and my $2,000 pen. Then he looked at my father. "Dr. Harrison," Judge Reynolds said, his voice deceptively mild, "are you aware of the current status of the mortgage on your primary residence at 442 Crestview Lane?" My father stood up. He smoothed his jacket, trying to regain the composure he had lost minutes ago. "Of course I am, Your Honor," my father said, though his voice wavered slightly. "It is a standard mortgage. There have been some minor clerical errors with the payments recently, due to the banking crisis, but it is under control. My financial advisors are handling it." Judge Reynolds looked down at the paper again. "According to this certified document, the note on your property was in default as of 90 days ago. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on Tuesday." My father turned red. "That is a private matter, Your Honor. It has no bearing on my daughter's mental competency. In fact, it proves my point. I am dealing with complex financial pressures, and I am trying to secure family assets like the South Fulton land so we do not lose our standing." The judge held up his hand to stop him. "You didn't let me finish, Dr. Harrison. The bank did initiate foreclosure, but they halted the process yesterday afternoon." My father let out a breath he had been holding. He smiled a tight, triumphant smile at the gallery. "You see," he said, gesturing to the reporters, "I told you it was handled. My investors must have come through. It was just a misunderstanding." "It was not your investors," the judge said. "The bank sold the note. They sold the debt to a private holding company." My father blinked. "A private company? I don't understand. Who bought it?" The judge turned the paper around so the courtroom could see the gold seal at the bottom. "The note was purchased in full, including all penalties and back interest, by a corporation called GHS Holdings, and the sole signatory for GHS Holdings is the woman sitting right there." The judge pointed a finger at me. "Your daughter, Zara Harrison, is now the owner of your mortgage. To put it plainly, Dr. Harrison, you are living in her house, and she has the legal right to evict you for non-payment as of this morning." The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy. It was the sound of a worldview shattering. My father stared at me. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked at Kyle, who was shrinking into his seat, trying to become invisible. He looked at Bianca, who had stopped checking her makeup and was staring at me with a mixture of horror and greed. That is impossible, my father whispered. He turned to his lawyer. Tell him it is impossible, Preston. She cleans toilets. She digs ditches. She doesn't have $1.2 million. It is a forgery. She forged it. She is sick. This is part of her delusion. Preston picked up the copy of the document the bailiff had handed him. He scanned it quickly. His face went gray. He dropped the paper on the table as if it were burning hot. It is certified, Lawrence, Preston muttered. It is real. The funds were verified. My father made a sound like a wounded animal. He looked at the reporters. They were writing furiously. The cameras were flashing, capturing the exact moment the great Dean Harrison realized he was a tenant to the daughter he despised. No, my father shouted. His voice cracked. He stepped away from the table. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You stole it, he screamed. You stole that money. You deal drugs. Kyle was right. You are a criminal. There is no way you earned that money legitimately. You are a gardener. You are nothing. Dr. Harrison. Sit down, the judge warned, reaching for his gavel. I will not sit down, my father roared. He was losing control. The mask of the dignified academic was gone. Underneath was just a small, angry man who couldn't handle being bested by someone he considered inferior. He walked toward the witness stand. The bailiff moved to intercept him, but my father stopped at the railing, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. Look at her, he yelled to the courtroom, gesturing wildly at me. Look at what she is wearing. Look at those shoes. She is a disgrace. She comes here into this court mocking me. Mocking this family. Dad, I said softly into the microphone. It is over. It is not over, he screamed, spit flying from his lips. You think because you stole some money you are better than me. You think you can buy me. You are trash, Zara. You have always been trash. That is why we put you in the back. That is why we don't invite you. Because you don't fit. You are broken. Dr. Harrison, I am holding you in contempt, the judge boomed, banging the gavel. But my father couldn't hear him. He was in a trance of rage. He was pouring out 30 years of resentment. I gave you a name, he bellowed. I gave you a legacy, and you threw it in the mud. You prefer the company of garbage men to your own blood. You reject our standards. You reject our excellence. He turned to the reporters, his eyes wild. Write this down, he shouted. She is not a victim. She is a predator. She tricked us. She sat there and watched us struggle and did nothing. She is cold. She is heartless. Then he turned back to me, his voice dropping to a guttural growl. All she does is embarrass me. He took a breath, his chest heaving. Look at her. She smells like manure. She smells like the dirt she plays in. She is not a Harrison. She is a mistake. The last word hung in the air like a gunshot. A mistake. The courtroom was frozen. The reporters had stopped writing. They were just watching, mouths open. The church ladies in the back were clutching their pearls, looking at my father with horror. Even Kyle looked terrified. My father had gone too far. He had said the thing that no parent should ever say. He had revealed the rot at the core of his soul. I sat there and I felt a strange sense of peace. For years I had wondered if I was the problem. I had wondered if I tried harder, dressed better, achieved more, if he would finally love me. But in this moment, looking at his twisted red face, I realized the truth. He didn't hate me because I was a failure. He hated me because he couldn't control me. And now that he knew I was powerful, he hated me even more. I didn't cry. I didn't scream back. I just looked at him with a profound, quiet pity. Judge Reynolds stood up. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked tired. He looked at my father with the kind of expression one reserves for something unpleasant on the bottom of a shoe. Are you finished, Dr. Harrison? The judge asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. My father was panting. He looked around, suddenly realizing where he was. He saw the shock on the faces of his supporters. He saw the disgust on the faces of the jury box. He saw the cameras pointing at him, recording his meltdown for the evening news. I... My father stammered, the adrenaline fading, leaving him weak. The judge leaned forward. He took off his glasses and set them on the bench. You talk about embarrassment, Dr. Harrison. You talk about legacy. You stand there in a suit you probably haven't paid for, screaming at a woman who just saved your home from foreclosure. My father slumped against the railing. You called her a mistake, the judge continued. You said she smells like manure. Well, let me tell you what I smell from this bench. I smell arrogance. I smell greed. And I smell a man who is so blinded by his own ego that he cannot see the diamond he is holding because it has a little dust on it. The judge picked up the file Darnell had submitted earlier. The one with my company's financials. You said she isn't a Harrison. You are right. She is not. She is something you never were. She is self-made. Judge Reynolds looked at Darnell. Mr. Washington, does your client wish to respond to these outbursts before I issue my ruling? Darnell looked at me. He nodded slightly. I leaned into the microphone. My father was staring at the floor, defeated. Yes, Your Honor, I said. I have one thing to say. I looked at my father. Dad, I said. You always told me to dress for the job I wanted. You wanted a socialite daughter. I wanted to be a builder. You see dirt. I see foundation. You see garbage. I see energy. I paused. And regarding the smell, that is not manure, Dad. That is the smell of hard work. And it is the smell of the money that just bought your debt. I stood up and walked down from the witness stand. I didn't walk back to the defendant's table. I walked over to the plaintiff's table. I stood right in front of my father. He wouldn't look at me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the Mont Blanc pen. I placed it gently on the table in front of him, right next to his trembling hands. You can keep the pen, I whispered. You are going to need it to sign the eviction notice. I turned around and walked back to my seat. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Judge Reynolds picked up his gavel. He didn't bang it, he just held it, looking at my father with a shake of his head. In the matter of the petition for conservatorship, the judge announced, the court finds the petitioner's claims to be without merit. Furthermore, based on the evidence of predatory financial intent and perjury regarding the drug accusations, I am dismissing this petition with prejudice. He looked at Kyle. Mr. Turner, I am remanding you into the custody of the bailiff pending an immediate investigation by the district attorney into perjury and filing a false police report. Kyle let out a yelp as the bailiff moved toward him. And Dr. Harrison, the judge said, turning his gaze back to my father, I suggest you find a good bankruptcy lawyer, because I have a feeling your landlord is not going to be lenient. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The sound was final. It was the sound of chains breaking. I watched as the reporters swarmed my father, shouting questions. Dr. Harrison, is it true you are broke? Dr. Harrison, did you really call your daughter a mistake? Dr. Harrison, how does it feel to be evicted by your own child? He covered his face and tried to push through the crowd. But there was nowhere to go. The world saw him now. The real him. I picked up my canvas bag. Darnell gave me a high five. Come on, boss, Darnell said. We have a meeting with the airport planning committee in an hour. I smiled. Let's go, Darnell. I have some dirt to move. I walked out of the courtroom, leaving the chaos behind me. I walked out into the bright, hot Georgia sun. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like exhaust and asphalt and blooming magnolias. It smelled like freedom. The courtroom had settled into a stunned silence following the revelation of the mortgage, but I was not finished. My father sat slumped in his chair, a man whose entire world had just been inverted, yet he still believed that at the very least he understood the playing field. He thought he had lost his house, but he still clung to the idea that he was the intellectual superior, the man of vision, while I was merely a laborer who had stumbled into some lucky cash. He believed the land in South Fulton was a swamp. He believed I was stubborn for keeping it. He believed his offer of $30,000 was an act of charity for a worthless asset. It was time to dismantle the final lie. I looked at Darnell. He was currently leaning against the defense table, checking his fingernails. The bumbling, stuttering Public Defender Act had served its purpose, but now it was time to discard it. Darnell caught my eye and nodded. He stood up. The transformation was subtle at first, then absolute. He straightened his spine, adding 2 inches to his height. He buttoned his mustard-colored jacket, but he did it with the precision of a man buttoning a tuxedo. He took off his crooked glasses, folded them deliberately, and placed them in his pocket. When he turned to face the judge, the nervous tick in his left eye was gone. The sweat seemed to evaporate. The man who stood there now was not a court-appointed lawyer from a bus stop. He was Darnell Washington, Yale Law graduate, chief legal officer of a multi-million-dollar corporation, and he was ready to close. "Your Honor," Darnell said. His voice had changed completely. The stutter was gone. The high-pitched uncertainty was replaced by a rich, commanding baritone that filled the room without the need for a microphone. Judge Reynolds looked intrigued. "Mr. Washington," he said, "you seem different." "I am feeling much better, Your Honor," Darnell said with a slight shark-like smile. "Now that we have established the financial insolvency of the petitioner, I would like to address the core of his argument. The assertion that my client, Ms. Harrison, is mentally incompetent because she refuses to sell the 50 acres of land in South Fulton for the offered price of $30,000. My father lifted his head. He looked confused by the change in Darnell's demeanor. "It is a swamp," my father muttered, his voice weak but defiant. "It is a mosquito-infested bog. It is worth nothing." Darnell ignored him. He walked over to the audio-visual cart in the center of the room. He didn't fumble with the cords. He connected his laptop with a single fluid motion. "May I present Exhibit C?" Darnell announced. He pressed a key. The lights in the courtroom seemed to dim as the large projection screen behind the witness stand flickered to life. It was a map, but not just a standard road map. It was a high-resolution digital rendering of the greater Atlanta metro area, specifically the southern quadrant. It was overlaid with complex topographic lines and zoning color codes. I watched the faces of the people in the gallery. They were leaning forward, squinting at the screen. My father was staring at it, his brow furrowed. Kyle was still trembling in his seat, but even he looked up. "This," Darnell said, using a laser pointer to circle a large gray area, "is the current footprint of the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. As we all know, it is the busiest airport in the world." He moved the red dot to the right, tracing a large swath of green that bordered the airport's edge. "And this," Darnell continued, "is the proposed site for the new cargo logistics hub and the tertiary runway expansion, a project that has been in the federal planning stages for 5 years. My father scoffed. "We know about the expansion. That is why we wanted to sell the land. The city needs space. But Zara's land is marsh. You cannot build a runway on a marsh. It is geologically unstable. That is why it is worthless. That is why the 30,000 was generous." Darnell paused. He looked at my father with something that looked almost like pity. "You are right, Dr. Harrison," Darnell said. "You cannot build a runway on a marsh. You cannot pour concrete on wetlands. It would sink." My father smiled. A broken, jagged smile. "See," he said to the judge, "even her lawyer admits it. The land is useless." But Darnell interrupted, his voice cutting through my father's momentary relief. "You are forgetting one thing about modern aviation zoning laws, specifically the Environmental Protection Agency's noise and emission buffer mandates." Darnell clicked a button on a remote. The map changed. The green area, my grandmother's land, suddenly pulsed with a bright blue light. It sat directly between the proposed runway and the residential neighborhoods to the south. "For the airport to expand," Darnell explained, lecturing the room as if he were a professor, They are legally required to maintain a 500-acre biofiltration and acoustic buffer zone. They cannot pave it. They cannot build on it. They need a living, breathing ecosystem to absorb the carbon output and dampen the decibel levels for the surrounding community. They need a marsh. My father's smile faltered. In fact, Darnell said, stepping closer to the screen, they don't just need a marsh. They need this specific marsh. Because of the unique drainage elevation of the South Fulton Basin, Ms. Harrison's 50 acres are the hydrological heart of the entire region. If you pave over the surrounding areas, the water has to go somewhere. It goes here. Without this specific piece of land acting as a sponge, the new runway would flood every time it rains. The room was silent. I watched my father processing the information. He was a smart man in his own way. He was beginning to see the trap. So Darnell continued, the city didn't need to buy the land to build on it. They needed to control the land to ensure it was never built on. They needed to guarantee it would remain a green zone for the next century. He turned to look at me. I was sitting stoically, my face betraying nothing. My client, Ms. Harrison, understood this. While her family saw mud, she saw a biological asset. While her family saw a tax burden, she saw leverage. She didn't ignore the land, Dr. Harrison. She spent the last 10 years conducting soil analysis, water table surveys, and environmental impact studies. She packaged that data and presented it to the Federal Aviation Administration. Darnell clicked the remote again. A document appeared on the screen. It was a contract. The header read, Federal Lease Agreement, Critical Infrastructure Support. My father squinted at the text. Ms. Harrison refused to sell the land, Darnell said, because selling is a one-time transaction. Selling is for people who need quick cash. Wealthy people do not sell assets. They lease them. He highlighted a paragraph in the middle of the document. Last week, Darnell announced, his voice ringing out. Ms. Zara Harrison finalized a 99-year lease agreement with the Airport Authority and the City of Atlanta. The land will be used as the primary bio-buffer zone for the new expansion. And the terms, Judge Reynolds asked, leaning so far over his bench, he was almost standing. Darnell smiled. The city has agreed to an annual lease payment of $850,000 adjusted for inflation every 5 years for the next 99 years. A gasp went through the courtroom. I saw the church ladies clutching their chests. I saw the reporters' jaws drop. However, Darnell added, holding up a finger, that is just the lease. The contract also includes a signing bonus, a lump sum payment for the exclusive rights to the carbon credits generated by the wetlands. He looked directly at my father. Dr. Harrison, you offered your daughter $30,000. You called it a nest egg. You said you wanted to save her. Darnell clicked the remote one last time. A check appeared on the screen. It was a digital copy of the deposit receipt from the United States Treasury. The amount on the check was $85 million. The number hung on the screen. 85 million. It was big. It was bold. It was undeniable. 85 million, Darnell repeated softly. That is the value of the swamp you tried to steal. That is the value of the incompetence you tried to declare. The sound that followed was distinct. It was the sound of glass shattering against wood. Kyle, who had been holding a paper cup of water, had lost all motor function in his hands. The cup slipped from his fingers, hit the edge of the table, and splashed water all over his velvet trousers. He didn't move. He didn't jump. He just stared at the screen, his eyes bulging out of his head. He looked like a man who had just watched his own soul leave his body. My father made a noise that sounded like a dry heave. He grabbed the edge of the table, his fingernails scratching against the wood. He stared at the number. 85 million. He looked at me, then back at the number, then back at me. His face went from red to a terrifying shade of gray. He tried to speak, but his throat seemed to have closed up. He was doing the math. He was calculating the interest. He was realizing that the daughter he had banished to the back door, the daughter he had ridiculed for wearing boots, was not just rich. She was a tycoon. She was richer than the university he worked for. She was richer than everyone he had ever tried to impress combined. 85 million, my father wheezed. Preston Giles, the expensive lawyer, closed his laptop. He didn't say a word. He just started packing his bag. He knew when a case was dead. He knew when a career was over. He looked at my father with sheer disgust, realized he was never going to get paid his retainer, and literally turned his back on his client. Bianca let out a scream. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a scream of pure, unfiltered envy. "You knew!" Bianca shrieked, jumping up and pointing at me. "You knew the whole time. You let us suffer. You let us struggle with our bills while you were sitting on $85 million. You are a monster, Judge!" Reynolds banged his gavel, but he didn't look angry at her. He looked amused. "Sit down," Ms. Harrison, the judge, ordered, "or I will have you removed." I looked at Bianca. I looked at her cheap black dress and her desperate, angry face. "I didn't let you suffer, Bianca," I said calmly. "I let you live the life you could afford. There is a difference." My father finally found his voice. It was a broken, raspy thing. You tricked us," he whispered. "You set us up. You knew we would try to take the land. You waited." "I didn't trick you, Dad," I said. "I just let you be yourself. I let you show the world exactly who you are. I gave you every chance to just be a father. I gave you every chance to ask me how my day was instead of asking for money. If you had invited me through the front door, if you had just once treated me with respect, I might have used that money to build you a new library. I might have paid off your house quietly." I stood up and smoothed my cardigan. "But you didn't want a daughter, Dad. You wanted an asset." "Well, you were right about one thing. I am an asset. I am the most valuable asset in this city, and you just lost me." My father slumped forward, burying his face in his arms on the table. He began to weep. Not the fake tears for the cameras. These were real tears. Tears of a man who realized he had held a winning lottery ticket in his hand for 35 years and had thrown it in the trash because he didn't like the way the paper felt. Darnell closed his laptop. The screen went black, but the image of the $85 million seemed to be burned into the retinas of everyone in the room. "We are done here," Darnell said. Judge Reynolds looked at me. He nodded. It was a nod of respect, a nod of recognition. Game recognized game. I turned and walked toward the aisle. The reporters parted like the Red Sea. They were staring at me with awe. I knew what the headlines would be tomorrow. They wouldn't be about the crazy gardener. They would be about the secret multimillionaire, the Green Queen, the genius of South Fulton. As I reached the doors, I heard Kyle's voice. It was pathetic, whining, desperate. Zara, wait. We can talk. I can help you invest it. I know about tax shelters. Zara, we are family." I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the hallway. I walked past the bus stop where Darnell had staged his entrance. I walked to the parking lot. I climbed into my Ford F-150. It was still dirty. It still had mud on the tires. I started the engine. It roared to life. I drove out of the parking lot, merging into the traffic of the city I now effectively owned. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. $85 million. It was a nice number. But the look on my father's face when the screen lit up, that was priceless. The silence in the courtroom following the revelation of the $85 million contract was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum just before an explosion. My father was staring at the screen where the numbers were still glowing, his mouth slightly open, his eyes glassy. He looked like a man trying to read a language he had never learned. $85 million. It was a sum that didn't just solve problems, it created dynasties, and he had just spent the last hour trying to have the owner of that dynasty committed to a mental institution for being poor. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat. The sound echoed off the wood paneling, snapping the room back to reality. He picked up a thick binder that Darnell had submitted into evidence at the start of the hearing, a binder that my father's lawyer Preston Giles had barely glanced at because he was too busy preparing his speech about my dirty boots. The judge flipped through the pages. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. He stopped at a page marked with a yellow sticky note. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at my father. Dr. Harrison, the judge, said, his voice deceptively calm. I want to go back to a statement you made earlier. You said, and I believe I am quoting you correctly, that your daughter digs in the trash. You said she is a janitor. You said she embarrasses you because of her lowly station in life. My father blinked, trying to focus. He wiped a layer of sweat from his upper lip. Yes, Your Honor. She works in waste management. She drives a truck. It is undignified work for a woman of her background. The judge nodded slowly. Waste management. That is an interesting way to put it. He turned the binder around so the gallery could see the page. It was a vendor list. The official vendor list for the university where my father served as dean. I have here the quarterly budget report for your university, Dr. Harrison, the judge continued. Specifically, the facilities and maintenance budget. It seems that 3 years ago, the university underwent a massive overhaul of its environmental compliance systems. They hired a new contractor to handle everything: hazardous waste disposal, biohazard processing for the medical school, landscaping for the historic quad. My father looked confused. I don't see what this has to do with... The name of the contractor, the judge interrupted, tapping the page with his index finger, is Green Horizon Solutions. My father frowned. I know the name. I see their trucks on campus. They are everywhere. They are always digging something up. Yes, the judge said. They are everywhere. And do you know who owns Green Horizon Solutions? My father shook his head. Some corporation, some conglomerate. What does it matter? The judge looked at me. He smiled a small, knowing smile. It matters, Dr. Harrison, because the CEO and sole proprietor of Green Horizon Solutions is sitting 10 feet away from you. My father froze. He looked at the judge. Then he looked at me. He looked at Darnell. That is a lie, my father whispered. It is a matter of public record, the judge said. Your daughter isn't just a janitor, Dr. Harrison. She is the vendor who keeps your university running. Every time you flush a toilet in the administration building, her company processes it. Every time you walk across the manicured lawn to give a speech about excellence, her crew cut that grass. And every month for the last 3 years, your signature has been stamped on a check made out to her company. The judge leaned forward, his eyes locking onto my father's. You stood here and called her incompetent. Yet you have been paying her millions of dollars to clean up your mess for years. You didn't know because you never bothered to look past the logo on the truck. You saw the work, and you assumed the person doing it was beneath you. You never stopped to think that the person doing the work might also be the person signing the paychecks. My father was shaking his head violently now. No, that is impossible. She drives a Ford. She wears those clothes. A CEO doesn't look like that. A smart CEO looks like whatever she needs to look like to get the job done, the judge countered. I watched my father. He was shrinking. The arrogant giant who had terrorized my childhood was dissolving into a puddle of confusion and regret. But I wasn't done. The judge had revealed my professional victory. Now it was time for the personal blow, the one that would end this war forever. I stood up. The movement drew every eye in the room. I didn't ask for permission this time. I walked out from behind the defense table. I stood in the center of the aisle, bridging the gap between my father and me. And it is not just the university, Dad, I said. My voice was soft, but in the silent courtroom it carried like a bell. My father looked up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with fear. He knew something else was coming. You talked about the mortgage, I said. You told the judge it was a clerical error. You told the press you were a victim of the banking crisis. I took a step closer. Last week, when the bank initiated the foreclosure on the house at 442 Crestview Lane, they put the debt up for auction. It is standard procedure for high-risk assets. They wanted to offload the bad paper quickly. My father gripped the edge of the table. How do you know that? Because I bought it, I said. The words hung in the air. Simple. Devastating. I bought the note, Dad. Through a holding company. GHS Holdings. Does that sound familiar? It stands for Green Horizon Solutions. My father turned a sickly shade of gray. You bought my mortgage. I nodded. I paid $1.2 million in cash. I paid the back taxes you missed. I paid the penalties for the 6 months you didn't pay. I own the note, Dad. I own the lien. I took another step. I was standing right in front of him now. Technically, I said, looking down at him, I am your landlord. I heard a gasp from the back of the room. It was my mother. She had been sitting quietly in the back row, hiding her face, but now she was standing up, her hand over her mouth. She was looking at me with terror. She realized that the daughter she had ignored, the daughter she had let my father bully, now held the keys to the roof over her head. And Kyle, I said, turning to my brother-in-law. Kyle was staring at the floor, trying to disappear. He didn't look up. Your business loans, I said. The ones for the crypto startup. The ones you used the family cabin as collateral for. Kyle flinched. The bank bundled those too, I said. Toxic assets. That is what they called them. They were going to seize the cabin next month. I paused. I bought those yesterday morning. Kyle let out a whimpering sound. So let's be clear about the hierarchy here, I said, addressing the entire plaintiff's table. You brought me to court because you said I couldn't manage money. You said I needed a conservator. You said I needed you to save me. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. I don't need saving, Dad. I am the savior. I am the only reason you still have a roof over your head. I am the only reason Kyle isn't facing bankruptcy fraud charges today. I have been quietly propping up this family's facade of wealth for months, buying your bad debts, just to keep the Harrison name out of the mud. My father looked up at me. There were tears in his eyes now, but they weren't the tears of a man sorry for what he had done. They were the tears of a man who realized he had lost his power. Why, he whispered, why did you do it? If you have all this money, why did you let us humiliate you? Why did you let me make you sit in the back? Why didn't you just tell us? Because I wanted to know, I said. Know what he asked. I wanted to know if you could love me without the money, I said. I wanted to know if I was enough for you, just as Zara. Just as the girl in the muddy boots. I wanted to see if you would ever respect me for my character, not my net worth. I looked at him with profound sadness. And you gave me my answer. You didn't want a daughter. You wanted a bank account. You wanted a prop for your photo ops. You were willing to lock me away in a mental facility just to get your hands on my property. That is not love, Dad. That is predation. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I said. As the holder of the mortgage on the petitioner's primary residence and the holder of the business loans for Mr. Turner, I am formally serving notice in open court. I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 white envelopes. I tossed them onto the table. They landed with a soft slap in front of my father. These are eviction notices, I said. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. My father stared at the envelopes. He looked like he was having a stroke. 30 days. But where will we go? I don't know, I said, shrugging. Maybe you can stay with friends. Or maybe you can find a nice, affordable apartment in the warehouse district. I hear it is up and coming. I turned to Kyle. And Kyle, I am calling the note on the business loan immediately. Since I know you don't have the capital, I will be seizing the collateral. The cabin is mine. Kyle put his head on the table and began to sob. I looked at Bianca. She was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and awe. She knew she was next. She knew her lifestyle was funded by the parents I had just bankrupted. I am sorry, Bianca, I said. I guess Bali is definitely off the table. I walked back to my seat and sat down next to Darnell. I felt light. I felt clean. The weight of 35 years of expectation of criticism of being the black sheep had evaporated. Judge Reynolds looked at the scene before him: the sobbing son-in-law, the shell-shocked father, the terrified mother in the gallery, and the daughter who sat calmly in her cardigan holding the strings to all their puppets. The judge shook his head. "Dr. Harrison," he said, "you came here today to prove your daughter was incompetent. I think you have proven the exact opposite. You have proven that she is the only person in your family who knows what she is doing." The judge picked up his gavel. "This petition is dismissed with prejudice. And Dr. Harrison, if I were you, I would start packing. Landlords can be very strict about move-out dates." He banged the gavel. I stood up and gathered my things. Darnell packed his laptop. "Ms. Harrison," Darnell said quietly, "that was cinematic." "It was necessary," I said. My father tried to grab my arm as I walked past the table. "Zara, please. We can talk about this. We are family. You can't just kick us out. Where is your compassion?" I stopped. I looked at his hand on my arm, the same hand that had thrown a glass at me 3 days ago. I looked him in the eye. "My compassion is in the same place as your respect, Dad," I said. "It doesn't exist." I pulled my arm away and kept walking. I walked out of the courtroom, past the stunned reporters, past the flashing cameras. I walked out into the lobby and pushed through the heavy doors into the sunlight. I pulled out my phone and called my assistant. "Marcus," I said, "send a crew to 442 Crestview Lane in 30 days. Tell them to bring the big dumpsters. There is going to be a lot of trash to haul away." I hung up and smiled. I wasn't just a gardener anymore. I was the one cleaning house. And for the first time in my life, the view was beautiful. The courtroom was frozen in a tableau of absolute shock. My father sat slumped in his chair, his expensive suit looking suddenly too big for him, as if his physical stature had shriveled along with his ego. The eviction notices lay on the mahogany table like 2 white flags of surrender. Judge Reynolds did not break the silence immediately. He let it hang there heavy and suffocating, allowing the full weight of the revelation to press down on the Harrison family. When he finally spoke, his voice was not loud, but it carried the terrifying finality of a stone dropping into a deep well. Dr. Harrison, the judge, began removing his reading glasses and folding them deliberately. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen families tear each other apart over money. I have seen greed. I have seen betrayal. But I have never seen a father attempt to weaponize the legal system to cannibalize his own child simply because he underestimated her worth. You came into my courtroom this morning asking for a conservatorship. You claimed your daughter was mentally unfit because she works with her hands. You claimed she was a liability to your reputation." The judge paused, looking down at the heavy binder of financial evidence Darnell had submitted. "The irony, Dr. Harrison, is that your daughter is the only reason you still have a reputation to protect. While you were busy judging her appearance, she was busy buying your debts. While you were mocking her career, she was building an empire that dwarfs your entire university department. You asked this court to give you control over her assets. That request is denied. But more than that, it is dismissed with prejudice. That means you can never bring this claim again. You can never drag this woman into a court of law and question her sanity again." My father did not look up. He was staring at the grain of the wood on the table, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Beside him, Kyle was weeping silently, his face buried in his hands, realizing that his lies about drugs had just cost him his freedom. "But we are not finished." Judge Reynolds continued, his tone hardening. "The judicial system relies on truth. It relies on the sworn oath. Today that oath was mocked. Mr. Kyle Turner, you sat on that witness stand, and you looked this court in the eye, and you accused a woman of a felony. You fabricated a story about drug addiction to strip her of her rights. Perjury is not a game, Mr. Turner. It is a crime." The judge turned to the bailiff. "Bailiff, take Mr. Turner into custody immediately." I am referring this transcript to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for charges of perjury and filing a false police report. Kyle let out a high-pitched wail as the bailiff moved behind him. He scrambled up, grabbing my father's arm. "Lawrence, help me. Do something. Tell them I was just doing what you said. Tell them it was your idea." My father recoiled, pulling his arm away as if Kyle were burning him. He said nothing. He watched his son-in-law, the man he had praised for years, being handcuffed and led away through the side door. The click of the handcuffs was loud and sharp in the quiet room. Judge Reynolds turned his gaze back to my father. "And you, Dr. Harrison. While perjury laws are specific, there are other statutes regarding the abuse of the legal process and the misappropriation of family trust. You filed this petition in bad faith. You used the court as a tool for extortion. I am ordering a full investigation into your finances and your conduct as a fiduciary, and I will be sending a copy of this day's proceedings to the ethics board of your university." My father gasped. "No, Your Honor, please. My career. That is 40 years of service. You cannot destroy my legacy over a family misunderstanding." "It was not a misunderstanding," the judge snapped. "It was a raid, and it failed. This case is closed." He brought the gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot signaling the end of the Harrison family myth. I stood up. I felt a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in decades. Darnell began packing his briefcase, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. I looked at my father one last time. He was sitting alone at the plaintiff's table. His lawyer had already left. His son-in-law was in a holding cell. His daughter Bianca was huddled in the back row, terrified to make eye contact with me. I walked toward the aisle. As I pushed through the swinging gate, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The reporters who had spent the morning looking at me with pity or disdain surged forward. But they weren't looking at my father anymore. They turned their backs on the weeping dean and surrounded me. The flashes of their cameras were blinding, popping like fireworks. Microphones were thrust into my face. Ms. Harrison, a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, shouted, "Is it true the airport contract is worth $85 million? Ms. Harrison, another voice called out. "Can you tell us about your plans for the bio-buffer zone? How will Green Horizon handle the environmental impact?" "Zara, over here. Are you planning to expand your operations into commercial real estate development, given your recent acquisitions?" They didn't ask about the drugs. They didn't ask about the family drama. They didn't ask about my mental health. They asked me business questions. They treated me like a CEO. They treated me like a power player. I stopped for a moment, letting the camera lights wash over me. I saw my father standing on the periphery, just outside the circle of light. He was watching me. He looked small. He looked gray. He waited for a reporter to turn to him to ask him for a comment, to give him a chance to spin the story. But no one did. He was yesterday's news. He was just a footnote in the story of my rise. I looked into the nearest camera lens and smiled. It was a genuine smile. "Green Horizon is committed to the future of this city," I said, my voice steady and clear. "We believe that growth and sustainability can go hand in hand, and we believe that sometimes you have to dig through a little dirt to build a solid foundation." I turned and walked toward the exit, Darnell flanking me like a bodyguard. The sea of reporters parted to let me through. As I reached the heavy double doors, I heard my father's voice one last time. It was faint, drowned out by the questions of the press. "Zara," he called out. I didn't stop. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the doors open and walked out into the bright, blinding sunshine of the Georgia afternoon. I left the courtroom, the judge, the lies, and the man who had raised me behind in the shadows where they belonged. 1 week later, the fallout had settled like ash after a fire. The story had broken on the evening news, but it wasn't the tragedy my father had orchestrated. The headline read, "Local Entrepreneur Secures Historic Airport Contract." The sidebar story buried on page 6 mentioned a local academic facing an ethics probe. I sat in my office at the Sovereign Building. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sleek modern furniture. My assistant Marcus buzzed my intercom. "Ms. Harrison," he said, "there are some people here to see you. They don't have an appointment, but they say they are family." I spun my chair around. I checked the security monitor, standing in the lobby, looking small and terrified in the vast marble expanse of my reception area, were my father, Bianca, and Kyle, who was out on bail. They looked nothing like the arrogant trio who had sat in my parents' living room demanding money. My father was unshaven. Bianca was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Kyle looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Send them in," I said. A moment later, the heavy glass doors opened. They walked in slowly, their eyes darting around the room, taking in the original art on the walls, the panoramic view of the city, the sheer scale of my operation. This wasn't a gardener's office. This was a war room. They stopped in front of my desk. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer them a seat. I just looked at them over the top of my reading glasses. "Zara," my father began. His voice was hoarse. "Ms. Harrison," I corrected gently. "In this building, it is Ms. Harrison." He flinched. "Right. Ms. Harrison. Look, we received the notices. The eviction, the foreclosure." And I asked, "And we have nowhere to go?" Bianca blurted out, stepping forward. "Zara, please. You can't do this. Mom is a wreck. She hasn't stopped crying. We can't lose the house. It is our home. It is where we grew up. It is an asset," I said, using my father's own words from years ago. "And right now, it is a non-performing asset." "We are sorry," Kyle said, wringing his hands. "I am sorry about the court. I was desperate. I was scared. I know," I said. "And now you are facing 5 years in prison. Fear makes people do stupid things, Kyle." My father stepped closer to the desk. He placed his hands on the edge, leaning in. "We lost everything, Zara. The university. The board fired me yesterday. They said the publicity was too damaging. They stripped me of my tenure. I have no income. My pension is frozen pending the investigation. If you take the house, we will be on the street." I looked at him. I looked for a shred of the man who had terrified me as a child. I saw nothing but a beggar in a bespoke suit. "I am not unreasonable," I said. I pulled a folder from my drawer. "I understand that everyone needs a chance to earn a living." Hope flickered in their eyes. They thought I was going to write them a check. They thought I was going to let them stay in the mansion. I pressed the intercom. "Marcus, bring in the applications." Marcus walked in a moment later holding 3 clipboards. He handed one to my father, one to Bianca, and one to Kyle. "What is this?" Bianca asked, looking down at the paper. "Employment applications," I said. "Green Horizon is expanding. With the new airport contract, we need to scale up our workforce immediately. We are hiring." My father looked at the form. His eyes widened. "Entry-level waste segregation specialist," he read aloud. "That is right," I said. "It is an honest job. It pays $15 an hour, full benefits after 90 days. You will be working on the sorting line at the South Fulton facility." "The sorting line?" Bianca gasped. "You mean garbage? You want us to touch garbage?" I leaned back in my chair. "I built an $85 million fortune touching garbage, Bianca. I don't think you are in a position to be picky." My father threw the clipboard onto my desk. "I will not do it. I am a dean. I have a PhD. I will not sort trash for my own daughter." "Then you can leave," I said calmly. "The eviction stands. The marshals will be there on Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock. I suggest you have your things packed." I looked at Kyle. "What about you, Kyle? You need a job to show the judge you are a contributing member of society before your sentencing. It might help with your plea deal." Kyle looked at the clipboard. He looked at my father. Then he picked up a pen. I will take it," Kyle whispered. "Traitor," my father hissed. "I need the money, Lawrence." Kyle snapped. I looked at Bianca. She was crying again. I can't, she sobbed. My nails, my Instagram. I hear the lighting in the recycling plant is actually quite good for selfies, I said. But it is your choice. I stood up. You have the offer. You have the eviction date. Now if you will excuse me, I have a company to run. Marcus, show them out. My father looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a profound, crushing shame. He realized that the daughter he had tried to bury was the only one offering him a lifeline, and his pride was the stone tied around his neck that would drown him. He turned and walked out. His shoulders slumped. Bianca followed him, still weeping. Kyle stayed behind for a second, filled out the contact information, and handed the clipboard to Marcus. Thank you, Zara, Kyle whispered. Ms. Harrison, I corrected. Thank you, Ms. Harrison. He walked out. The heavy doors closed. I was alone in my office. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel glee. I just felt clean. I had scrubbed the stain of their expectations from my life. I had offered them the same dignity of labor they had mocked me for, and in doing so, I had exposed who they truly were. 6 months passed. The Georgia heat mellowed into a crisp golden autumn. I drove my new truck, a custom Ford F-250, onto the ridge overlooking the South Fulton land. It looked different now. The survey flags were gone. In their place were the beginnings of the biofiltration system. Heavy machinery moved in the distance, but it wasn't chaotic. It was a symphony of progress. I parked the truck and stepped out. I was wearing my work boots, the same ones my father had sneered at in court, but today I wore them with a sense of reverence. These boots had walked through fire. These boots had stood firm when the world tried to knock me down. I walked to the edge of the wetlands. The marsh grass was turning gold in the late afternoon sun. A flock of herons took flight from the water, their wings cutting through the air in perfect silence. This was the land everyone said was worthless. This was the swamp. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message. The name on the screen was simply Dad. I hadn't heard from him since the day in the office. I heard he was living in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, teaching online tutoring classes to make rent. I opened the message. It was long, a wall of text. Zara, I have been doing a lot of thinking. I know I was hard on you. I know I made mistakes. But I am your father. I did the best I knew how. I am proud of you, you know. I always was. I just wanted you to be safe. I hope we can put this behind us. I miss you. Maybe we can get coffee. I read the words. I looked for the apology. I looked for the admission of guilt. I looked for the words I was wrong. They weren't there. It was just more manipulation, more rewriting of history. He wasn't sorry he hurt me. He was sorry he lost. He missed the access, not the daughter. I looked at the delete button. For years I would have agonized over this. I would have typed a response, then deleted it, then typed another. I would have searched for a way to bridge the gap. But standing there on my own land, under my own sky, I realized I didn't need to bridge anything. I had built my own island. I pressed delete. The message vanished. I blocked the number. I put the phone back in my pocket and took a deep breath of the cool air. It smelled of earth and water and pine. They think class is about the suit you wear or the car you drive. They think power is about titles and country clubs. I had spent my whole life chasing their definition of worth, thinking I was coming up short. But I had taught them a lesson they would never forget. True class is owning your reality. True power is not needing anyone else to sign your paycheck. And the greatest flex in the world isn't a designer bag or a first-class ticket. It is holding the deed to the ground they stand on. I looked at the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. I was Zara Harrison. I was a gardener. I was a CEO. And I was finally truly free. I climbed back into my truck. I turned the key and the engine roared to life, a sound like a heartbeat. I put it in gear and drove toward the sunset, leaving the past in the rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until it was just a speck of dust, and then nothing at all. My journey taught me that true power never needs to raise its voice. For years, I let my family's rejection define me, thinking their shame was my burden to carry. But standing in that courtroom, I realized that dignity isn't found in a title, a last name, or a designer suit. It is found in the integrity of your labor and the ownership of your destiny. They judged my dirty boots blind to the empire I was building beneath them. Never let anyone's inability to see your value force you to discount yourself. Your worth is not a negotiation, it is a deed you hold. If you have ever had to build your own table because the people you loved wouldn't give you a seat, hit that like button and subscribe. Share your story of resilience in the comments below. I read every single one.